Go for liftoff in T-30.
Stand by for further instructions, Minnesota Black Robe Regiment.
Secondary guidance systems engaged.
Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, it will be on my mark.
All systems are a go. All systems are a go.
Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, you are over the target. You are authorized to fire at will.
Welcome. I think if this is going out, I'm thrilled because I was supposed to start 18 minutes ago and everything crashed on me. I had to literally reboot. So welcome to Minnesota Black Robe Regiment podcast. This is me, TC. I'm going to skip all the hullabaloo that I normally go through and promote everything. I'll probably do it after the end, after I rescue Christina from the torture of waiting for me tonight. So you guys are in for a treat. Christina from Radix Verum, and I'll have her explain what that means. It has nothing to do with video games. I know everybody's probably thinking, Radix, that sounds like some sort of weird video game gamer girl thing, but it's not. And you guys are in for a treat because we're going to talk, all things Gretchen Whitmer. Not that Gretchen Whitmer is a treat. If we wanted a treat and we were talking about governors, we'd be talking about Christina. But we're going to be talking everything surrounding the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping plot, the FBI, and Christina is going to introduce us to something called PatCon. And if you're not familiar with what PatCon is, you're going to want to share this out because I'm going to try and rope Christina into coming back in and doing a deeper dive onto PatCon. So without any more, Christina, thank you so much for being patient and sorry for the delay.
Oh, no
problem. You
problem.
are a tech person and a media person and a video person, so everything always works out just perfectly from the moment you decide you're going to do something, correct?
No. Never.
So it's
I would not refer to myself as a tech person, though. No way.
you're making a documentary. You have to be somewhat techie. I mean, I imagine you're doing your own editing and
no.
Oh, so you're
Thank God. I actually couldn't do that. I couldn't do it on my own. No way. Not a project this big. I do have an editor that I have to pay, but he's worth the money.
Yeah, I would imagine if you're paying him, he better be.
Yeah, have you seen the trailer?
Well, that's what I was going to say. Do you want to watch the trailer right out of the gate, or should we wait until we kind of introduce the subject matter a little bit more?
We can wait until we introduce it, but you'll see his work and you'll understand why he's so important.
So tell everybody why your brand is Radix Verum, or not Radix on Twitter. And
well, so Radix Verum, whichever you want to call it, doesn't matter to me. It is Latin for the root of truth, which I thought was kind of cool. Back in the day, years ago, it was like my internet, username or whatever, and it just kind of stuck with me. So it has nothing to do with video games, unfortunately. It sounds like more like something you get in a garden, like a radish, radishes.
I was going to say, please don't tell me that you pronounce it radishes in your neck of the woods.
No.
Okay. So I asked you, where you come from, a libertarian perspective, paleo conservative, Republican perspective, and you're kind of politically, ideologically homeless in the sense of you don't really align yourself with one particular traditional party, but
Yes.
You definitely have liberty leanings.
Yes, exactly. That's true. I'm an Orthodox Christian, so I think that is important too in like my worldview of how I prioritize like what I think is important. And it also has to do with like how I understand the existence of evil in the world, right? And like my understanding of evil being a thing, right? Which might be different from somebody who is secular or doesn't believe in, you know, the Christian faith.
You can say it.
Yeah.
I have Orthodox friends who tell me that I'm like their ugly stepbrother because I'm not Orthodox. So,
Uh,
yeah.
well,
I have,
so that informs my understanding of the world, though. I see
yeah,
the world through that lens that we live in a fallen world, and I think that people tend towards
sure.
sin, and I think that you have to work hard to try to be a good person and be a good Christian and stuff like that. I think it's probably a lot easier to live a different lifestyle, but so yeah, I mean, I just kind of do my own thing. Politically speaking, like I don't like to I don't really have a political party, I would
You have a
say
lot of
that
libertarian friends and followers,
I
though. They
do.
love you.
Yes. I love them too. I love my libertarian friends, and I would say if I had to, I would probably say I lean more right wing. If I had to,
Which is kind of the Mises Caucus version of libertarianism right now is kind of in that
yeah,
same position.
that's
So,
right.
and I'm not a libertarian. I'm homeless myself.
Okay, so you
And I
understand. Yeah,
yeah.
it's just, I don't think either party represents the will of the people. I think that's understandable, and I think everybody gets to
The
that those
heck you
people are
say.
there. They represent their donors, our elected officials. I don't think, I think most people question the two-party system and all of that and how that whole thing works.
Well, if you're
Um,
not questioning the two-party system at this point, I don't know that there's really any hope for you anymore. I don't you
you should be if you're
yeah,
not.
yeah, if you're not and if you're not questioning the entire structure after tonight, I mean,
Yeah.
I had Richard Booth on 2 weeks ago, and then I had uh our mutual friend Jose, which is, how I knew who you were, but I hadn't really dived in much, and then I heard you on with Jose talking about a lot of this stuff. And I quickly messaged Jose, and I'm like, dude, I need to poach her. And he was like, "Oh no, go ahead, yeah, absolutely." And I told him last week when I had him on, I said, "That's what it's so amazing because I've run into a lot of people who do podcasting, vlogging, or whatever you want to call this that I'm doing and others are doing. They're like, oh no, I don't know, I couldn't tell you how to get a hold of that person." And I'm like, how? Why? Well, I'm talking to them right now, and I'm like,
What does that mean?
what? You own? What is this? Some sort of weird copyright claim on them or what? I don't.
That's
And he was immediately told me, like, no, yeah, here's how you get a hold of her. And for the life of me, I could not find you on Twitter. And I was like, I know she's on Twitter.
that's
And
why.
and he immediately sent it over. And I think it was Brandon is another one that you guys had mentioned, who I believe is in your documentary.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Brandon
And
is awesome, by the way. For people who don't know who he's talking about, I talk about Brandon Caserta. He was one of the defendants in the Whitmer case, spent 18 months in prison, had his entire life turned upside down and destroyed. Was
pre-trial,
acquitted.
18
Yeah.
months in prison.
That's right. And just they kind of use Brandon as like the poster child for the Whitmer Fednapping hoax case because of the way he looks, because Brandon was into heavy metal and stuff like that. He's got like full sleeve tattoos. He has like neck tattoos and these big gauged ears. He just looks like kind of scary, right? So
Right.
out of everybody there, he was sort of like the guy that they really were showing all over the media, like, oh, look how scary these guys are,
And he doesn't, and he's not your quintessential, what you would imagine as some sort of far right radical either, because he doesn't meet, that clean cut country boy kind of crazy. I mean, well, it's Michigan, so everybody's crazy, but
True. I'm learning that.
but in a good way in most cases. But he just doesn't, and yet here he is he's now the face of this. So
Yeah.
before we dive in more into that and then start to get to your documentary and the trailer for that, how in the world did you get started in the world of this independent media, independent journalism, and investigative journalism, because I get people ask me that all the time. They're like, well, aren't you kind of like independent journalist, independent media? I said more independent media, but not terribly independent. I have a lot of opinions, and so I'm not afraid to, like, cause a little bit of a ruckus when I go places and things aren't going the way they should be going. But I know how I got into it, but how did you get into it? Because it's not common for, I mean, and I don't ask ladies their age, but you clearly are younger than I am. So how does a younger woman get into this line of work? Because it's kind of cost you a little. It's cost you a little bit. You had an incident a few weeks ago because
Yeah.
of because people don't like you,
Yes.
and
Yeah,
because of your views and the things you're willing to talk about.
that's right.
And so, you started down this road how long ago, and what got you started?
Several years ago, probably at least over 5 years now. I want to say back in 2017, 2018. I was a paralegal before that. So, I kind of like, when I was younger, I believed in like justice, I've always like had this, it's always been important to me that like justice is a thing. And
Right.
I was raised like Catholic. I went to Catholic schools and stuff like that. So I always had an understanding of like God's view of like biblical justice and stuff like that. And I thought, oh, that's important, that it's important that the people that are good are rewarded for being good and that the bad people are punished for being bad. So anyways, when I was like younger, I was in the criminal justice program in high school. And, I thought that was cool. They would do these things where they would set up like crime scenes for us, and then we would have to go and like collect the forensics and stuff. It was really fun. But then, you go and you work in law and you like really see what the legal system is, and it just completely shatters like your,
Yep.
naive, young idealism about like what it's really like. We have like all these TV shows like CSI, Law and Order, all of these shows about like law enforcement and stuff that give you the incorrect idea of how the legal system is and how it works. And in all these cop shows, the cops are always the good guys.
Yeah.
They're always going after bad guys. They never break the rules. Forensics are, 100%
Spotless. They
scientific
never get anything
fact.
wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And like everything is cut and dry,
Yeah.
black and white, good guy, bad guy, like things like that. And I think that it gives this misconception that many Americans have, and they probably don't even realize it. When you've been raised and propagandized from the time you were kids, because everybody is raised by televisions now, these TV shows. You start watching these as a young age. They target children with these kinds of shows, and then you don't think about the subtle influence that has on you. But it does when you look at like the numbers of federal prosecutors, what their statistics are. Like they have 99.9% conviction rate, and it's just not possible that they never get it wrong. It's more that people have this belief in the system,
Yes.
and they think that it's this sort of what do you call it? Like credentialism, this idea that because somebody went to college and they have a piece of paper with a nice little stamp on it, they have this fancy degree, that all of a sudden that means that like, they're beyond reproach and they never get it wrong and you can't question them. They're always trying to do the right thing. It's just not possible that they're like self-motivated, self-interested parties. So there's just this foolish idea, naive, childlike understanding of the legal system and how things work. And I can't tell you how many people, smart people, normal people I've talked to who believe that a grand jury wouldn't sign off on an indictment unless there was something there. Oh, there had to have been some proof that something happened, or otherwise a grand jury wouldn't sign it. Like, of course they are. Those things are like rubber stamps. Those people don't understand.
Wait, are you saying that grand juries can be politically motivated? I mean, I'm not. I
Whoa.
mean, I, nothing recently
This is
has
some
happened.
crazy talk, right?
It's crazy. So, so you actually went into working in law firms, working with attorneys
Mhm.
as a paralegal, and if you don't know, 98% of the time the paralegals do 98% of the work,
That's true. It's
and
famous
it's
stuff.
like it's like RNs versus doctors or CNAs or LPNs versus the RNs. We all know that the RNs do more work than the MDs, and the CNAs and the LPNs do far more work than the RNs do. And yet there's this tiered system where the top of the tier, and great, the guy's opens a law firm, goes into practice, he's got every right in the world to make the money and bring other people along with him, but we
Mhm.
all know where the brunt of the work is happening. And
Yeah.
and I shared just a brief amount of my personal story with you, but after spending almost 13 years working inside of the criminal justice system on the detention end of a local sheriff's office, I know exactly what you're talking about. When you see these conviction rates, whether it be at the, city level, county level, state level, federal level, it it all comes down to an overburdened system that's completely overwhelmed with cases, completely underwhelmed with the number of attorneys able to represent clients the accused in a responsible and reasonable way, and the ease of plea deals, which jacks up
Mhm.
the conviction rates, especially at the federal level, like you were talking about, when they're looking at a 99% or better conviction rate. And like you said,
Yeah.
so many people are like, oh man, they must be really good. No, people just can't afford to fight the
That's
state.
right. Or they don't know about it, or they're told they don't have a chance
Right.
anyways. That's something we saw all the time in in the legal system. Every time these public defenders are overburdened, they have a tremendous caseload. They don't have enough time to really devote the
Right.
proper amount of attention, to each case that they get. And so, and the other thing that people need to understand about the legal system, and I won't go off on I promise not to go off on a tangent on
That'll
this
be a
stuff.
completely different show for us.
Yeah, I know, right? I could spend 10 hours like just screeching about the legal system. But what people need to understand too is like it's supposed to be, an adversarial system, right? But the judges know the big law firms. The big law firms
Yep.
donate to the judges' reelection campaign. They all go to the same country club. The legal community is small. Some of these public defenders, they're going out and having drinks with these prosecutors that are the opposing side of their
Right.
case. They went to law school together. They
Mm-hmm.
all know each other. They're all friends. They're all pals. And at the end of the day, they're all trying to make a career for themselves. That's what these public defenders are doing. They're putting their time in probably before they go into private practice to make the real money. And with these prosecutors, it's the same thing. They want to make a name for themselves.
Right.
And so for them to work together, it's not a big deal. It's like, hey, we all have this massive caseload. What can we get rid of? Yeah, give that guy a plea deal. Sure, we'll do this, we'll do that. And they wheel and deal with each other. That's how these things are done. And a lot of these people going into the system, people like Brandon, that are have never really done anything wrong. And it's their first time dealing like with the legal system. I have no idea what you're getting into, and if you don't know what your rights are, like you're just going to be put through like the meat grinder. You have to,
Yes.
and that's another huge problem is so many people are ignorant of like what their rights are, and law enforcement can lie to you. Like the FBI can lie to you, the police can lie to you. You might not know that, but they can and they do, and they will. And
Absolutely.
they'll tell you, outright to your face, here, we're going to make you an offer. You can take a plea deal. You can
Mm-hmm.
choose to accept it or not. But if you don't, just know, we have a 99.9% conviction rate. So most likely we'll go to trial. And this is what ends up happening is that these judges are deferential always to the government, to the federal government, to these U.S. attorneys, these prosecutors. They allow them basically to control and run the show. They control the evidence. The judges usually grant their motions while denying the defense, the real ability to represent themselves. So the whole thing is a mess, and it has to be reformed from the ground up. And really working on the Whitmer thing has opened my eyes to that more. I mean, I knew from somebody that was inside the legal system, and I didn't do criminal law. I did litigation, I did family law and stuff like that, but I still understood how it works.
Right.
But just seeing how the prison system works has been crazy, and what's happened since I've started working on it, and just the crazy stuff that's happened, and the stupidity of it all, the waste, the money, everything has a cost. So every prison phone call is like $5 for a 15-minute phone call. It is such a racket. And that's just one thing, but the whole system is a racket. And you have to ask yourself, like, so these courts, family courts, for example, that employ guardians ad litem, court appointed therapy, blah, 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 all these different things. There are so many people whose lives just depend on the system continuing to exist and people continuing to use these courts, right? So yeah, the way the whole thing is designed is very bad, and it needs to be reformed.
Once again, what a shock that somehow the state manages to screw up everything it touches. So 5 years ago, you say, hey, I'm going to start doing some investigative journalism. I'm going to start digging into this. And then all of a sudden, 2020 rolls around, and that particular virus that heretofore shall remain unnamed, we're probably going to get flagged anyway for daring to challenge the narrative on Whitmer. But that rolls around. Things start to kind of heat up in the world politically and, constitutionally, and people are starting to have these arguments. Clearly, you're like a lot of us, you're paying real close attention to this, probably from a couple of different perspectives, since you were this, justice-loving person, which I hear a lot of myself and how you were describing yourself. And I'm going, if you're like me, you're going, okay, there's a lot of this that's not right. And then you start to hear, even more. And then all of a sudden news breaks about this massive plot of people who are upset about the lockdowns and upset about, the reaction to the virus in Michigan. All of a sudden, we're hearing that they were going to try and kill Gretchen Whitmer, and they were, and there's massive charges coming. This is going to be a big explosive case. It's going to unravel everything about the right-wing extremists in this country. Yeah. How early on were you paying attention to that story, and what was it? I mean, obviously it catches some people's eyes, and even some people who maybe would agree with us on some things, but not for some reason. It just, a lot of people just goes right through that sieve in their head, and it just kind of like doesn't affect me, so I don't care.
Yes.
It's just like a lot of people with the particular day in January of 2021 who they're not even aware that there's still people in prison that haven't been tried yet, and
don't even have a trial date set yet.
And now they just arrested a grandmother on misdemeanor charges and hauled her away, and she was with her mother. So some of us, it's catching in that sieve of our minds, and we're paying attention to it. When did you become aware, and just how deep into it did you get right away?
So, I became aware as soon as these guys were arrested. The next day, Gretchen Whitmer did this press conference, announcing that these guys, these white supremacist, domestic extremists, blah, 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 were, arrested on charges for conspiracy, and anytime I hear stuff like this, I'm like, okay, what's really going on here? And it just seemed like the timing of it was perfect. This is their October surprise. It is 1 month before the election. It's October 7th that these guys are arrested. Her press conference is the next day. It is the 8th, and it's this big thing, right? She's saying that she's referring to these people as Trump supporters and saying that Trump endangered her because he had tweeted "Liberate Michigan" A couple other states he had said to liberate, and these were in reference to these unconstitutional mandates that were occurring at this time
Right.
when people were violating the law, the Constitution, trying to usurp it to grant themselves extraordinary emergency powers that we know once they had, they're not going to give back. So, this is the backdrop of this happening. And Gretchen Whitmer, she seemed to me somebody that has been, that was being groomed, for higher office. You can tell when the Democrat Party has somebody that they think is going to be, one of their future, you can tell when some money is being dumped into them. Yeah, that they're dumping some money into them. They've got some kind of media team that is giving them media training. You can always tell when they've had a little bit more training on them. You can tell by the way that they talk at press conferences, words they use, that like, okay, this is somebody that is being prepped for something.
Gretchen was a great actress that day.
She has been groomed for a long time, right? That this is somebody that they want to potentially run for president one day, or maybe as a vice president. It was her and Gavin Newsom that I kind of saw as like, hey, they see these people as like their next stars, right? These are the people that are going to like the World Economic Forum. And we see her doing that now. She's speaking to the World Economic Forum on things like gun violence, and she's using this hoax to sit there and act like she was a victim and that she was somehow in danger, when we all know that that is a lie. So at that point, in 2020, I have already been an independent journalist, whatever you want to call it, for several years. I started out just kind of looking into things online, just doing my own research, putting it out there. And eventually, I started writing articles, doing shows, streams. And so I do my own thing. And if I want to look into something, it's because it's interesting to me. So the Whitmer thing stood out to me because at that time I had already been looking into other very similar things like PatCon. That was one of the things you wanted me to talk about. So I'll do that now. I know you mentioned you had Richard Booth on. Richard is probably much more versed in PatCon than myself. He probably is a better source for that than me. And Ken Silva is another one who you probably know. Ken's done some great work on PatCon. He wrote a couple articles about PatCon that I used in one of my articles about the Whitmer case and the PatCon legacy within the FBI. So just to briefly introduce PatCon, PatCon was an FBI operation. PatCon stands for Patriot Conspiracy. That's what they call. That's what they called it. You got to love the names they come up with this stuff. Their name for the Whitmer hoax was Operation Cold Snap. I don't know where they get this stuff from, but it always kind of makes me laugh. It's like, okay. I don't know if they do it to mess with us, but so PatCon, Patriot Conspiracy. PatCon is,
it goes back a long ways too.
It goes back we don't really know. I mean, that's the other issue with this, kind of like the CIA, so the CIA we know was involved in mind control experimentation and things like this.
Demonstrably true. Admitted in a congressional hearing.
Yep.
The church committee.
Yes, absolutely. And documented numerous times. Yeah. Now, Richard Helms tried to destroy and probably was successful at destroying most of the CIA's documentation related to things like MKUltra. However, the files that did survive were the financials. So this is when they were trying to get the funding for all these crazy things. So it didn't go into detail, but it does have a project description. So we do know that they were involved in this stuff. And we know that there were sub projects. So it's not just MKUltra, but under that, it's like, MK Naomi, MK Delta, Project Artichoke. There are a number of sub projects. It's like they have different names, but they're similar. They're under the same umbrella of mind control operations, if you will, right? So we have these different projects, sub projects under that. And what happens is once one of these code names gets burned, they just roll the same project out under a different name. So you can't FOIA, this name anymore. This name we now know has been exposed. So we just put it out under something else and the public doesn't ever hear about it unless, something happens and there's some kind of leak. But for the most part, like, when was the last time we had any kind of like whistleblower leak from the CIA that exposed something like that? There hasn't been. They all have these insider threat programs now within these agencies where they go around trying to find anybody that might become a whistleblower in the future, which is pretty crazy too, in and of itself. If you look at some of the intricacies of these insider threat programs and what they do, it's super insane. I couldn't imagine working at one of these agencies, So anyways, I think
And
most
some of the people who kind of came to that same realization have sacrificed quite a bit because of that, Steve Friend and Kyle Seraphin.
Yes.
And just to name two that are out there and very vocal, but there are more who are now starting to come forward. And so and like you said, we don't know how far back PatCon goes, but we know that it goes back.
Yeah.
And we can't trace it, but the entire gist of it, and there again, I don't want to dive too far into it, but the entire gist of it was to set up patriotic, right-leaning, white Christians, especially, into getting into trouble. And that, we saw, because when I had Richard on, we talked about it a little bit, on the periphery of it, that there were PatCon operatives in Elohim City.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
And I would imagine there's probably a good portion of them at Ruby Ridge, if not also involved in Waco. And then you start to, look forward from those incidents. And a lot of those principles have been applied now going forward into 2020, and probably going, other places as well, but 2016 into 2020, and to the point where the FBI got so bold that they just blatantly just were actively working against the sitting president of the United States.
Oh yeah,
like him or not, that's just true. They've admitted it.
Right, lying to a FISA court numerous times to reauthorize, a FISA they had no business having. And that I think too is the legacy of PatCon. In a sense, it is. So everybody knows about COINTELPRO. Everyone's heard about it. The FBI's disruption, infiltration, operation aimed at the left wing in the 60s and 70s. That was geared towards more like anti-war, far left type of groups. I could imagine groups similar to like the Weather Underground, or whatever, which we know, of course, the FBI had infiltrated. But that is, PatCon is not as well known as COINTELPRO. It isn't sort of like a household name. It isn't something that people really are aware of, that they had a similar, thing to COINTELPRO aimed at the other side, and this time instead of anti-war groups or whatever, it's militia groups. It's Christian militia groups and right-wing groups that they were infiltrating, and it never really led anywhere. So that's the other thing, because these PatCon operations, the groups that they were infiltrating, for whatever reason, if these people were engaged in criminal activity, they didn't choose to pursue it in court, where PatCon would have been disclosed, or where you would have gone through discovery and maybe we would have gotten this information. It wasn't like that the FBI busted something up and it led to prosecutions, people going to jail, like the FBI foiled some big plot or something like that. Didn't happen from any PatCon event. So we didn't hear about PatCon until the until I think 2007. And it's just very little of what we know about it. It supposedly went from 1991 to 1993, and then it was supposedly shut down. Well, and I think, they don't shut these things down. They
No.
just roll it out under a different name. So maybe instead of PatCon, you call it something else. But you can look at these things and you can see patterns, right? Where they're doing the same thing. And so I had been looking at Ruby Ridge, Waco, Oklahoma City. I had just started looking into those things when the Whitmer thing happened. And the reason that I was looking into those is because of another group called the Order of Nine Angles, the O9A. They are a satanic neo-Nazi group or whatever. They publish propaganda
one and the same.
books.
I mean, they're
right.
kind of, neo-Nazi, Satan. It's, whatever.
Yeah, they publish these books though that are propaganda books, with the names like Iron Gates, Liber 333, whatever. And the publishing house is called Martinet Press. This is the American branch of the O9A. And one of their members, a man, Joshua Caleb Sutter, was revealed to be a longtime FBI informant. He has been an informant since 2003. He became an informant because of some kind of weapon charge or something. But anyways, he had been infiltrating groups like Adam Waffen, O9A, and then trying to steer people into criminal activity. And very similar to, again, like you look at these operations and you see, hey, these people are employing, they have tactics, whatever, that they run on people. They'll find somebody that's vulnerable, potentially even mentally ill.
Yep.
They'll isolate that person. They'll befriend them, and then they'll start telling them that they should do something. The FBI is well known for this. There was a family of a schizophrenic man that was, I think, in his early 20s, and this was a man unable to live by himself. Like, he was so impaired that he had to live with his family. They had guardianship over him, right? Like this. So this is somebody that's disabled. He's handicapped, mentally ill, schizophrenic. And so what does the FBI do? They send an informant to befriend him and try to get him to purchase a bomb. And then the FBI tries to arrest him. And his parents had to sue the FBI. And it's crazy because the parents describe how this happened, how this informant, they had kicked out of their home, and they tried to, get their son not to talk to this person who, in the informant, took extraordinary lengths to somehow go behind the parents against their wishes to get into contact with this person, to still have contact with them, because I think they took this kid's phone away or something. They were trying to prevent him from meeting this guy, but the informant just kept pushing and pushing. And this is what the FBI does. So I was reading
Terror
about
Factory does a great job. I'm sure you've read it.
Yes, Trevor Aronson's book.
It does a great job. And I mean, Trevor, definitely comes from a slightly different spectrum than you and I.
Yeah,
and
sure.
You can hear some of that, but that doesn't invalidate the truth of what he covers.
He's absolutely been correct. I mean, his book has been really great because he did a study of a lot of these so-called terrorism cases post 9/11, where they were studying them for elements of entrapment, and they found that
almost
out
all
of
them.
Yeah, out of I think it was out of 595, over 390 it had elements of entrapment,
right?
Which is just sad and crazy.
And that tactic was developed years before, and yet so many people who maybe would be in agreement with, I look back now and I go, the Patriot Act was a horrible overreach. It gave us all the surveillance that they're using against us now.
Yeah.
But the Patriot Act was just the codification of the tactics that agencies like the FBI and the BATF and others had been using on Americans for years. And that works so well for them that now they're using it on more diverse groups of people. They're not just targeting Muslim extremists that they create. Right. I mean, not that they create them, of course, but so now they're using them, and that's so now having this periphery look at PatCon and kind of some of those tactics, that plays heavily into what happens in your investigation into the Whitmer kidnapping plot. That's a
Yeah.
massive. It's like there is no Whitmer kidnapping plot with that stuff. So kind of give us the finer fish bones, if you will, of what happened there and how that all started to play out.
Yeah, and I just want to encourage people to read Ken Silva's articles on PatCon, read about him, read about Kenneth Trentadue, Jesse's brother, and what happened to him. Just read some of the work that has been done by the OKC researchers. They've done some incredible stuff, putting together really like you can start to get a sense of how the FBI does things, how the federal government does things, and I think that that's terrifying in a sense. And I would also suggest that in order to understand how we got with the Whitmer thing and how that happened, you have to go back and look at these other PatCon operations to understand how we got here. And Patriot Act, right? The Patriot Act, Patriot Conspiracy, PatCon, Patriot Act. Like are people putting things together, right? They wanted to pass the Patriot Act, and they had to do certain things in order to do that. And we could look at the bare bones of the Patriot Act, and you can trace that back further to the counterterrorism bill from 1996 that was passed in the aftermath of OKC, that did not have popular support prior to that. And that counterterrorism bill was, I think sponsored by Joe Biden, probably written by Michael Chertoff, and then later becomes the Patriot Act. That legislation, though, they could not have gotten that passed without these PatCon operations happening first. I think another thing to consider, too, that I think people need to understand historically is the militia movement of the 90s, the truther movement of the 90s as well, which it's hard to remember now, but think back to people like Bill Cooper, right? Bill Cooper talked about meeting Timothy McVeigh and Michael Brescia, who he was convinced was John Doe number 2. And it's like, so you have to understand that, right? Their goal to kind of demonize the militias or associate them with fringe extremism and stuff like that, infiltrate these militia groups. And then the interesting thing, too, that one of the big questions we have from PatCon is, well, what happened, right? What happened to PatCon? We really don't know. They claim that it was shut down in 1993. We know that's not true. We know Oklahoma City is PatCon. So no, we know Waco is PatCon also. I mean, we're pretty sure. It should be obvious. So if you can look at that they were able to get away with what they got away with at Ruby Ridge, shooting a woman who has a baby in her hands.
And a teenager.
And executing a dog, somebody's like that happened, all
absolutely.
for nothing. Randy Weaver hadn't done anything wrong. He just didn't want to be an informant for the FBI. And that's why this happened.
And they treated it was how dare you say no to us?
Right. And they they led an insurrection on Randy Weaver's property. They laid siege to the building, right? The things that they're, accusing these grandmas of doing on a certain day in January. That's what they did, though, right? That it was the government that did that first to American citizens on American property.
And I want to add something in here too for people. Like I had somebody recently ask me that you seem to be really, honing in on the idea of police reform, and you definitely come from a more conservative perspective than what I'm used to seeing, is what he said. When you talk about police reform, because normally when we hear people talk about reform right now of law enforcement, it's kind of right wing hating the FBI because of how they view what they did to Trump, and what happened with that day in January in 2021. And I said the problem is I'm consistent. Absolutely 100% consistent. I want police reform across the board. And if you think the FBI is the only problem, it's because you're not paying attention to who's training all your local law enforcement.
Hello, and who's training the FBI? Groups
Right.
like the ADL.
Yeah,
Who?
exactly.
I'm sorry. Who does the ADL represent? What agency are they with? Oh, that's right. They're a private for-profit company that is most likely foreign agents, agents of a foreign nation, which is kind of interesting how they're allowed to violate FARA and things like that for their lobbying group. But they're training local law enforcement, and they brag about it. They say the ADL on their website says, and they brag about it, that they train the FBI. So we have these questions like, okay, so who are you accountable to then? You're being trained by this private group that might be engaged in espionage on behalf of a foreign nation that is giving our tech secrets to our adversaries. Like,
and those
China.
tactics are being trained down to the local level, at the state level,
100%.
at the county state level, and the municipal state level. And I had an experience almost 2 years ago now. I went with a group of parents to a school board meeting, and we were met at the door of the Rochester Public School main offices for a school board meeting by a former lieutenant from the Rochester, Minnesota Police Department, who is now the administrator in charge of safety and security of the school district, wearing his FBI lanyard with his school board FBI. What is it called? The FBI's Academy for, I don't know. It's just where they wearing with his school board ID.
That's insane.
And so much of what the FBI does gets passed down to local law enforcement. So don't think for a minute that your local law enforcement is not using this exact same tactics on local people that the FBI is using across the United States. And they are utilizing local law enforcement in a lot of these operations.
It's worse than that. We have in this country a tyrannical police state. We are the incarceration nation. We have higher incarceration rates than third world countries where people get executed in the broad daylight.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's mostly because a lot of those countries just put a bullet in your head.
Well, that's true. Thank God we're not living in El Salvador, but you know what I mean, though. The point being, though, is that every single one of the, it goes on. We are a police state now. We have the highest levels of people in prison for no reason. Most of this stuff comes from the war on drugs, which is, again, it's these vague terms that they come up with that are kind of Orwellian. We had like the global war on terrorism. What is terrorism? Terrorism is like an idea. So, there can be terrorist groups, but generally speaking, it's like, it's sort of like an ideology. How do you have a war on that? It doesn't really exist on its own. Right. How do you have a war on an inanimate object like drugs? Like, are the drugs thinking for themselves? Like, what's going on here? No, you're having a war on victims of cartels and things like that.
You are supporting by keeping their prices high, by making their product illegal, which therefore drives up the cost. So,
and you could get into like questions about what is the DEA doing, right? Or the CIA, what were they doing when they were bringing in, heroin smuggled inside the bodies of GIs, during the Vietnam War, and then selling those drugs on the street here to fund their black operations. So there's like a whole system in place, and Gary Webb, by the way, did great reporting on the crack cocaine epidemic in the 80s. And again, the intelligence agency's involvement in things like street level drug dealers, which is interesting when you think about it. But yes, DHS. So the Department of Homeland Security is another Orwellian organization that was created in the aftermath of 9/11, 9/11 being one of these deep events, right? I call them that because there's a level of foreknowledge involved. There's a level of prior planning, government corruption, inside job, cover up, elements of things like that. Insider trading, there's all these things involved where this wasn't just something that happened the way that we're being told.
Right.
OKC is another deep event.
Well, 9/11 is a perfect example. Like, everybody knows it happened.
Mhm.
There's this extremely fringe view out there that it was all holograms, and you know, you've heard the
Crisis
stories.
actors, yeah.
And crisis, I'm like, that's a lot of crisis actors. Which, we have the federal government has the budget to pay them all. But
Yeah.
I mean, nobody that I would ever associate with would ever tell you that those buildings didn't come down and that we didn't have 3,000 and some people die that day
Right.
between all of the
And
locations.
they
The questions that we have are, who's responsible and who
exactly.
knew what and could have prevented it but didn't, either out
Yes.
of ineptness or pure evil. That's it. Like, there's just only two options. It's either ineptness or pure evil that allowed it to go on the way it did.
Right. Well, and the other thing too is just I think people get they keep people bogged down, like arguing about the details of like,
Right.
could jet fuel melt whatever, who whatever.
That's what they want you to talk about.
Who cares? We're not going to argue about the temperature of jet fuel and steel columns and stuff. Did this happen? Yes. Okay. And then start looking at things like who was involved in the insider trading, who was shorting, American
Mhm.
Airlines, or what was the United Airlines or whatever prior to this happening. Look at people like the people who held security contracts at the World Trade Center building. What weren't they associated with Jeb Bush or something? The
Right.
security company. I look at Larry Silverstein, Lucky Larry, and the insurance he had, and the fact that he didn't come in that day. Look at the apps like I forget the name of the app, but there was an app that certain people were warning each other not to go in that morning. How did they know to do that? There are certain things that you can look at. You can say, how about P-Tech? It's a big rabbit hole. Don't get me started on 9/11.
No, we could,
swear.
and I know that's what we're gonna hard turn now back to
you start looking at the things that you can prove though, and going into the documents and stuff like that, and just making connections between people, and I think that's really where you get to the truth, and you find that, hey, there's an agenda behind the stuff. It doesn't just happen, and then we always find out that anybody that was involved, like, was on the radar of the feds, blah, blah, blah. They basically tell you that they're doing the stuff. I don't know your familiarity with like the occult, but I see these people as, high level Luciferians. I think that there are secret societies, there are these people
it's
who,
undeniable. I mean,
and they telegraph,
Bones
I think,
is real.
what they're doing. It's absolutely real. They don't deny it. In fact, they rub it in your face many times. Part of that, I think, is revelation of the method, where they tell you that, like, yes, we're, this is what we're doing. They reveal it to you, so and for whatever reason, for their occult belief, they feel like, okay, as long as we're telling them what they're doing, they're consenting to it, And I think that's why they're so brazen with some of the things that they do. Like Donald Rumsfeld said, we're the actors. We're the ones who act, and everybody else is reacting to us. He said we're the actors in history, though. Like, we're the ones making history, and we're the ones doing things, and everybody else is reacting to them. But anyway, so you can look at stuff like 9/11 and what comes after that, the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, DHS. We never had that before. We have 17 intelligence agencies now, and DHS has all of these fusion centers together with the FBI, 72 fusion centers across this country. And as you were saying, you're saying local police. It's not just the FBI, and it isn't just a few bad apples at the top. All these different talking points that we've heard from the blue types, right? Who didn't know better, and just, think that we just back law enforcement automatically, which is not the case for me anymore. Law enforcement has been incredibly militarized, and they're trained by the FBI, who's trained by the ADL, who have IDF people teaching the police, basically, and the FBI to see Americans as enemy combatants. And another thing that the FBI does is they have a fast track program to take veterans from the military, people who were just in the war on terror, and then they employ them in the FBI. And these are oftentimes people who have PTSD. They are people who have been in a foreign area where there are things like
Constant
IEDs
threats.
and constant threats, and you just watched your friends get their face blown off in front of you, and like all this crazy stuff has happened. So maybe you're a little bit paranoid and you're traumatized. Rightly so. And then you are come back and you don't really integrate into civilian society. But, you know, you can maintain like having your gun or whatever, a badge, and you go right into the FBI, and they'll tell you, hey, we have this big insider threat problem. We have this big DT
Enemies
problem.
of the Republic are here.
Exactly. And they actually are indoctrinating these agents into believing that part of the country are bad people and that have to be locked up. And if you think that's not happening, I don't know what to tell you. But in the Whitmer case, why is it that every single FBI agent that was called to testify had less than 1 year's experience with the FBI? Like, they're very young and fresh and new to the FBI. The main agents that handled that investigation, the 3 lead handling agents were not called to testify because each of them were thoroughly corrupted.
Yep. And they could have been easily exposed if put on a stand in front of a defense attorney that actually was worth their salt. So when did you start to realize just how, I mean, so you're digging into it right away. You're looking at names, you're looking at these people. And just so people know, of all the individuals involved in the Whitmer kidnapping plot, how many of them were actually not either informants or FBI agents?
That's a great question. So immediately when I started looking into the Whitmer thing, it just had the stench of PatCon on it for me. I had just been looking at the 09A stuff and this Joshua Caleb Sutter, the things that he was doing through Martinet Press. You know, that the FBI was a silent publisher in a publishing house that was printing neo-Nazi satanic propaganda and books that were calling for mass cullings, for incest, things like that. And it boggles the mind that the FBI is funding this publishing house and putting out books like this. What? And then they're running around telling everybody that there's this big neo-Nazi threat. And, you know, you kind of start looking, well, like, you're making it, though. Like, you are literally publishing the propaganda books that these groups are using, you know. It's you're the ones making the threat, you know, it's stuff like that. So I noticed, you know, right away, I was said, okay, there's something weird here. And to their credit, I will give BuzzFeed credit for this. Left leaning, you know, coming at it from a completely different angle than me. Jessica Garrison at BuzzFeed was the first reporter to really dig into the story, and she contacted the guys while they were in prison when this thing first happened, and she started looking into their story, calling their families, their friends, speaking to character witnesses, basically. And she was told essentially the same thing I was told by all of the associates of these men, which is that these guys are not violent. They wouldn't do anything to hurt anybody, you know. So she starts looking into it and reporting on it. And she was the first person to report that there were 12 informants in this case. And that's just what we know about, by the way, 12 informants, 2 undercover agents. So the case itself is massive and sprawling, and I could spend 10 hours talking about it. And, you know, I'd still have more to say. There were 13 men arrested. 6 of them were charged federally. The other 8 were charged in state cases. So it's a little bit different, and they have different charges. The 6 that were charged federally were charged with conspiracy for kidnapping, and then some were charged with WMDs, which we'll get into in a moment. But the other 8 that were charged in state cases, they're charged with providing material support for terrorism. And what they mean by that is that you let somebody train on your property. You taught somebody how to tie a tourniquet. you provided, and then the FBI later frames that person. So now you've just provided material support for terrorism, unbeknownst to yourself. And these
Even though you had
guys,
no idea what they were doing or what, allegedly were plotting, you were just like, "Oh, hey, you wanna learn how to do, like, traumatic first aid? Okay, I can do that. I have that training or I have
by
that
the
skill."
way, that's not illegal. It's perfectly legal to teach medical training. It's perfectly legal to teach defensive firearms training as well. Everything that these guys did was perfectly legal. Now, what happens in the issue with the FBI is how they portray what happened. So, when we talk about the Whitmer case, we talk a lot about entrapment, but I want to focus more on the word framing because when typically when somebody's entrapped, it is because law enforcement has essentially induced them into criminal activity that they were otherwise not predisposed to commit, right?
Right.
So they're coerced, basically pressured into committing a crime. But when you look at the Whitmer case, nobody broke the law. There was no crime. Nobody kidnapped Gretchen Whitmer, and there was no conspiracy. So when we say these guys were entrapped, what we really mean by that is that they were framed by the FBI. The
Right.
FBI followed them around for over a year, some of them almost 2 years. And they recorded them, at various times when they were drunk and, intoxicated or stoned and in an altered state of mind, recorded them saying incredibly offensive things, and then spliced a bunch of stuff together and came up with a narrative. So it's a little bit different than entrapment. And I want people to understand that distinction because this was something that the defense lawyers themselves argued about. Is this entrapment or is this framing? Because what crime were they entrapped into committing? No one committed a crime. No one was kidnapped. Nobody stormed stormed the Capitol, or there was no boogaloo or whatever nonsense that they came up with, the government's narrative, which was constantly changing.
Right.
None of it happened. So what were they entrapped into doing? I don't know. No one can really show me where a law
Right.
was broken. Really.
Well, basically for the FBI and the federal prosecutors, especially, what it came down to was they were conspiring to do something that we didn't want them to do. And that was the end of the narrative for him. There was no more talk about how involved the FBI
That's
itself
correct,
was.
right.
I mean, to the point of, like, you made references to people being drunk or high, right?
Yes.
A lot of these individuals were either drunk or high or both,
Or both, yeah.
because the insider informant that they planted into this group was supplying the money for the booze and the weed.
Mm-hmm. That's
or
right.
actually supplying the weed.
Giving them ounces of weed.
Yeah.
Like, the FBI
Getting it from the
informant.
FBI.
Right. Steve Robeson giving Barry ounces of weed, Yes. And this is, by the way, in their own paperwork, the FBI writes that they've admonished, their CHSs not to do stuff like that. In everything that they're admonishing them not to do, they're doing. They've admonished them not to take leadership positions in groups. They're, all doing that. So another thing, and why it ties back to PatCon and why I think this is important. So I think that you can't really understand the Whitmer case. You can't really unravel it without first understanding what happened in PatCon. If you don't have the understanding that, hey, in the 80s and 90s, the FBI was infiltrating these groups, these militia groups, and putting their people in place, we have no idea what happened after. We don't know how much more, right? Maybe they put even more people in these groups. Maybe they're almost at this point entirely controlled by the FBI, which I think may be more true than we'd like to believe. But so they had a very long time to embed themselves in these organizations, in these very groups, that then they're going around and saying, hey, these groups are a big threat to us. Well, okay, so you need to have that understanding, first of all, that many militia groups are most likely compromised in some way. They're infiltrated. There are informants out there trying to join these groups and then incite people into doing stuff. So people need to have that understanding. Now, before we get any further into the Whitmer case, I do want to play the trailer because I think that helps explain a lot. And then we'll talk about some of the things that are mentioned in the trailer. If you want,
Absolutely. Let
I
me
can
get
bring that up.
No, I can do it right here. Or if you have the actual right off of YouTube, or
Yeah.
if you want to do a present on it, and I will allow that in.
Okay, let me pull up the trailer here and share my screen, and we'll play the trailer so everyone can see it. Okay, let me screen share. Oh, I just started playing it without sharing the screen. My bad. Okay, here we go.
So,
all right, guys, this is the trailer for the documentary. The documentary is called Kidnap and Kill, an FBI Terror Plot.
Earlier today, Attorney General Dana Nessel was joined by officials from the Department of Justice and the FBI to announce state and federal charges against 13 members of 2 militia groups who were preparing to kidnap and possibly kill me.
We're grateful to the FBI and law enforcement to discover these domestic terrorists and stop them. You know, it's the sort of behavior you might expect from ISIS.
You might see a number that high in a sprawling narcotics conspiracy that stretches from coast to coast and beyond. That's a pretty high number in a case like this. It really reflects, I think, how deeply the government has been diving into this investigation to try to make these cases.
It was just literally a bunch of working class guys who on the weekend got together and, exercised their rights and trained with firearms. So the FBI says, hey, we'll just pay for everything.
Who arranged the meeting? The FBI's paid provocateur. Robeson was getting paid to set this stuff up.
So they make the route, they set the locations, they make the plan, they do everything, and Adam's literally just sitting in the basement of a vacuum repair shop smoking blunts all day.
You're going to hear that my client was the leader of this group. But I think you're also going to hear that there was an election held to identify the leader, and it was Dan.
How can I frame this social situation to make this naive person appear to be a dangerous, violent terrorist? The whole goal was for the FBI to spend millions of dollars to create militia groups, record them saying offensive stuff, and then frame them in a fake conspiracy.
All right, so that was that's the trailer.
And that's something I want people to point out. That was Brandon Concerta that was speaking throughout with the gauged ears. What he was saying is right out of the playbook of what Aronson said in Terror Factory. Upwards, in some of the cases that Aronson pointed out, upwards of 6 digits or more were payouts to paid informants who were setting up targets that the FBI wanted to take a fall.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing that we see, maybe not in the 6-digit range, but the same thing in Michigan.
100%.
Finding these people who would be easily exploited and then feeding in money and equipment and information and all of that. And the key, and I think in your trailer there, which, by the way, you're right, your editor did do a great job. The key is even going so far as to draw the maps and the routes and all of that.
They did all of it. The FBI planned it. And you know what's so funny about it to me is that I am not a particularly intelligent person. There's nothing special about me. Anyone could go find this stuff. The information is out there. That's another thing. People ask about the the discovery in the case. You know, there were 6 terabytes of discovery in this case. Not all of it has been unsealed. There's still a lot that remains under protective order, completely sealed, so we do not have access to it. And there is important information there. That's where most of the really juicy stuff is still hidden. So we need that information to come out. However, you don't need it to show that the FBI framed these men. That information is already out there.
Right.
We already have it. We already know. Okay. First of all, the criminal complaint was written by an FBI agent named Richard Trask. Richard Trask is a real scumbag. He lied in his
Don't hold back, Christina. How do you really feel?
Yeah, I always, I try to do my best here to maintain TOS and stuff and not really go off on these people like I want to. But Mr. Trask has embarrassed himself enough on his own. I don't have to do it for him. So Richard Trask wrote the criminal complaint, which is complete with outright fabrications. You know, he's never faced perjury charges for that because, by the way, these agents signed sworn declarations when they write these criminal complaints, these indictments, these superseding indictments. They are swearing that the information they have is true and correct to the best of their ability. But, they outright lie. So Richard Trask's criminal complaint lies. And what I find very odd, and it would be interesting to me, and if I had a team of people that would help, but I don't, I'm one person, but I'd be interested to go through the criminal complaint, the indictment, the superseding indictment, the transcripts from the first trial, and then the transcripts from the second trial, because the story changes throughout. The reason why I think it's so difficult for people to understand, what are these guys even charged with? Like, what is it that they are alleged to have done? The reason it's so difficult for people to understand is because the story has changed so many times. All right. So let's just hone in on one aspect of that. WMDs. These men were charged with WMDs. So what exactly did they do that relates to that? All right. Well, we've had 3 different stories about this. We've been told there was an unregistered destructive device. But then we were told that there was that towards the end of the investigation, and it's funny because they say this in their own internal communications, right? The FBI agents speaking to their informants. They're saying,
hold that back up, Christina. So because I want people to understand, like, I know that what you're hearing, and Christina, I know you've run into this. This is why you have enemies.
Yes.
And I've run into it myself ever since my story broke, as far as, the collusion against me by even fellow law enforcement. And there again, I was only a detention deputy, but I was part of a law enforcement organization. I have come out and said it's time for reform. And I've been very vocal and very hard and very critical of even local law enforcement and state law enforcement. She's not making this. She doesn't have an axe to grind in the sense of she's always hated law enforcement, and it's not an issue of hating law enforcement.
I wanted to be law enforcement.
Right. It's not an issue.
I was in the criminal justice program. I love them.
Right. It's not an issue of hating law enforcement even, but that's exactly what they do with you. They paint you as a kook or a radical because you don't meet a narrative. If you claim to be somewhat conservative or Republican or, traditionalist or whatever, and you said it earlier, it's kind of back to blue at all cost mentality.
Yeah.
The minute you don't do that anymore, you're now a radical and you're a kook and you're making things up. Kristen, hold that up one more time. She's got the receipts,
I've got
people.
The documents, guys.
We hear that all the time. Bring the receipts. She's got the freaking receipts.
I have boxes of them. I have files like this on my desk filled with them. But these are important here because these are what I was holding up and showing to you guys is this is anyone can get this on Pacer. You can go to USA, United States of America versus Adam Fox. Okay. And you can look up ECF number 383-1. This was filed December 29th, 2021. It's 46 pages. And what this is out of court statements. So this is stuff that unfortunately the judge did not allow the jury to see, but we can see it. And this is why it's so important, so crucial. You know, in what we have here is communications between FBI agents and their informants saying 5 months into the investigation, these guys have no plan. You know, we need to come up with something. We have the FBI saying to their informants, we have an FBI agent, Jason Chambers, saying to his informant, the main informant, Dan Chappell, you know, if you guys, you know, if there's a plan, we can make it happen. The FBI says we can make it happen, but we need these guys to come up with a plan. They're not, no one wants to plan anything. So you, first of all, what these revelations tell us immediately is what normal people think of when they hear about the use of informants or the FBI foiling a plot is they presume that there was a plot already in motion, and the FBI hears about it. They put an informant in place to act basically as an observer and just simply observe and report back to law enforcement what other people, criminals, are doing and planning. That's what you think of when you think of informant. You think someone who is informing. And this is why another key thing that Barry Croft, one of the defendants in this case, honed in on when, you know, I was working with him getting his story for the documentary is, don't call them informants. They weren't informing about anything. They're provocateurs. They're there to try to create something. They're not informing on something that is already happening, a crime in motion that the FBI needs to stop to protect people. That's not what is happening. We know that because the FBI is saying it. They are texting their informants saying, well, we could make it happen if there was a plan, but you need to, you know, we need these guys to come up with a plan. We need Paul to come up with something. You know, they're basically saying, come up with a plan and like convince these guys that it was their idea, you know, but, and we have them admitting.
And he tried.
Yeah, exactly.
numerous times. And they all kind of kept looking at him in your own, you know, and so people know I've listened to some of what she's saying, and this is why I wanted her on. They were like, no, bro.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So numerous times they try, right? They keep pressing. So by this point, guys, the FBI, you know, they spent around $6 million, I think was the estimate by the defense lawyers of what the government spent in total. In this case, they've invested a lot of money into it. And we know that the lead handling agent, Jason Chambers, said he was going to run it as a TEI, whether he got approval or not. So that's another thing that is important. We got text messages between FBI special agent Jason Chambers, one of the lead handling agents, to his FBI superior. Her name is Amanda. He's texting her, telling her, I am going to run this case as a TEI, whether I get approval or not. TEI stands for Terrorism Enterprise Investigation. Now, he has to get approval from an FBI superior before he can categorize it as a TEI and run it that way, because that's the highest threat level for DT cases that they have. It basically gives you access to all of the resources of the FBI. Millions of dollars, you know, we're talking like poll cams, the best tactical equipment, whatever. They've got drones flying overhead at 7,000 feet, tracking people, basically gives them the ability to do stuff like that, to invest the FBI's resources into this case. You don't just do that for nothing, right? So he had announced before anything, you know, before there was a plan, right? There wasn't a plan, but he announced he was going to run it as a TEI. What does this also tell us? So the FBI, 5 months into this investigation, is saying, number one, that there isn't a plan. They didn't come across something already in motion that they foiled. They're saying they're going to run it as a TEI. They are deciding what kind of case this is going to be. It wasn't made a TEI because it was some big case and somebody said, hey, these guys are big, scary, you know, we need a TEI. No, it's because Jason Chambers said he was going to run it that way because he wanted to. Whether he got approval or not, That was his idea. He was planning.
He didn't
the
care.
case, the kind of case it was going to be.
Yeah.
When he himself said in emails to other FBI agents, I'm retiring from the FBI soon. I'm going to launch my career in the private sector, and I need a big case to transition into the private sector. He had a private intelligence company called Exa Intel that happened to be seeking multi-million-dollar contract with the federal government to advise them on DT cases.
Yeah,
so he stood to make millions of dollars.
He needed this.
His company.
He was padding his resume.
Oh, here's another interesting thing about Mr. Chambers. I don't know if I have the paperwork in front of me, but I do. This guy is a real piece of work. Okay, so I want people to look at this. What you're looking at is an email between Jason Chambers, one of the lead agents in the Whitmer case. And we don't know who the email is being sent to, but we can presume it's going to a colleague, a friend. He says, let me see. Okay, yeah, this is it. He says, I trust negotiations with Louisiana and other states are proceeding well. Remember, he's talking about his private company here. In the interim, Shelley and I are daily planning and preparing for Exa Intel to go live. That's his private company. And Shelley, by the way, is someone who apparently was preparing daily, planning and preparing daily for Mr. Chambers' private company to go live. She evidently was being paid she was a paid FBI informant for this agent, but she's also working and planning daily for his private company to go live. So she's getting paid to be a CHS by the FBI, and
working for him.
She's working for his private company daily, preparing it to go live. So you can ask yourself about misallocation and misappropriation of taxpayer dollars, in the form of who's paying the money that she's getting as an informant. What you have to understand is Exa Intel hasn't gone live yet. It hasn't made money. He can't pay her a salary yet because Exa Intel has no profits yet. But if they get the Whitmer case, they get this big case, and he can use that to transition into the private sector and get a multi-million-dollar contract with the government. He'll be able to pay her soon. But in the meantime, why not just pay her as a CHS and give her a couple envelopes of cash with thousands of dollars in it? And no accountability.
And,
so he
and
says,
what a lot of people don't realize is that not in all cases, but in the majority, I would say upwards of 85 to 90% of cases, these paid informants are criminal. They have faced or are facing criminal indictment, whether it be your local law enforcement. We had a case here in Minnesota. A friend of mine owned a business, a bistro that she chose to keep open during the governor's lockdown orders for small businesses like hers. And the local chief of police used a confidential, reliable informant to infiltrate a protest and take pictures and videos. Now, I know how it works in Minnesota. That person was a criminal, was probably facing far more severe charges than what my friend ended up getting out of this. Exactly. And it's the same thing all the way through. So when I tell people the FBI passes these tactics on down to local law enforcement, they do. They've all learned this works. And this is what's happening here. This Shelley, or whatever her name was, almost without a doubt, can't say it for a fact, so I am opinionating here. I'm opining. More than likely was a criminal of some sort facing actual charges that she committed a crime, but they flipped her. And now not only is she an paid informant, but she's going to be working for this guy in his private business.
Yeah, daily planning and preparing for Exa Intel to go live. Now listen to this. He says, I've also been preparing things at my office so that I can leave the bureau and join Exa Intel full-time very soon after it is funded. So Exa Intel, they're waiting on, their funding. He says, I am currently the acting supervisory special agent of my squad, which has allowed me to reallocate resources such that my eventual exit will be relatively painless. what FBI resources, sir, are you reallocating?
That
to make
sounds like
your
an admittance that he was using taxpayer
I know, to
dollars
pay
to
her.
pad his pocket so that he
Yeah.
had a nice soft landing when he left.
100%. There's really no doubt about this being improper. What he's describing here it's an impropriety, okay?
So I'm going to assume that he was immediately brought up on charges for this, correct?
Of course not. He was probably promoted. But what's interesting again, and so there's weird things about Exit Intel too when you start digging into what it was actually going to do. So we have a couple flyers for Exit Intel, diligent vigilance, it says, and I also have an archive version of the website before they scrubbed his name off of it. But it's, when you start trying to look at who registered Exit Intel, what state, it's like some weird place in New Mexico, some weird property out in the middle of nowhere. Mr. Chambers tried to deny that Exit Intel was his company at first, which was most likely a violation of the law. As the defense lawyers in this case pointed out, when they sent this email and the information about Mr. Chambers' private company to the prosecutor in the Whitmer case, Mr. Nils Kessler, because, by the way, he had an obligation to investigate it because this guy probably broke the law, as the defense lawyer suggested. But it is interesting when you go through Exit Intel, they were going to provide like private security to events, right? Event contracting. So, and it's so funny because one of the elements of the Whitmer thing was something that happened at the Lansing Capitol. So there were anti-lockdown rallies happening. There were two that occurred in Lansing in 2020 at the Capitol, one April 15th and I think one April 30th, 2020. So the Wolverine Watchmen go to this event. They're already infiltrated by the FBI at this point. The FBI is leading their group, essentially. Their informant, Dan Chappell, is he's the XO. So he's basically like their main leader. He's their commanding officer. He's the one that is running their tactical training. It's Dan doing all of that.
There
while
again,
he's working
the paid informant people.
Leadership role of the group.
Do we
all
know?
of the training.
Do we know what kind of criminal history he had?
So Dan actually was an Iraq war veteran, as he claimed. He was not part of the team that rescued Chris Kyle, which was the story he told the Wolverine Watchmen. Dan's story seems to be that he was an Iraq war veteran that came back home and was working as a truck driver, not for the Postal Service, as the prosecutors kept trying to say. He was working for a company that was contracted to the Postal Service, but he was a truck driver and he wasn't really good at that. He was making about $50,000 a year doing that. As an FBI informant, he made over $54,000 cash for about 6 months of work. He also got relocated.
I'm in the wrong line of work now.
He got a new house. He got a new laptop. He got a smartwatch and a couple other goodies that they gave him. And then they gave him another $20,000 cash bonus in December of 2020 after these guys, after they got the first guy to take a plea deal and after they had arrested these men. So it was basically, oh yeah, good job setting these poor innocent people up. We're going to give you even more money.
Once again, is something else that that you'll never hear him talk about, but it is now well known in a lot of these informant cases. They get a bonus. They don't tell them how they will for sure, and they don't tell them how much it could be, but they tell them, look, if you do this and we get a conviction, there could be more for you.
That's right. And they're getting envelopes of cash from Chase Bank, by the way.
With no accountability. You can go spend this on whatever you want to spend it on. Yeah.
Envelopes of cash from Chase Bank. So, I think that this guy's story, though, is that, he was sort of a failure. He was somebody that wanted to be an FBI agent. I think he wanted to go to college for like criminal justice or something, and the FBI bought him a new laptop so he could do that. But he said in text messages to his handling agent that his work on the Whitmer case was him building his resume. So who was he building his resume for? in the capacity of as a paid FBI informant. For who? What does that have to do with him being a truck driver? It doesn't make sense. What's
Right.
he really building his resume for? That's a question we should all be asking. But that is one of the things that came out in these text messages, and keep in mind that the jury was not allowed to hear any of that. The jury didn't get to hear about exit intel because the judge said that it wasn't relevant to this case, just wasn't germane to the case. How is that not germane to the case? Just like every exculpatory statement, when these guys were saying, we're not okay with kidnapping, we're not black bagging politicians, we do defensive training, these exculpatory statements. The jury was prevented from basically seeing any of the evidence that exonerated these men, and all they got to see was a clown show. 100% clown show controlled by the government. Judge Jonker completely in on it, allowed the prosecution to basically do whatever they wanted. The other agent I told you about, Richard Trask, that wrote the criminal complaint, they found the defense lawyers and their private investigators found his private Facebook page where Richard Trask was making anti-Trump Facebook posts, and he was like crazy. He was writing stuff on Facebook, like he called it garbage thought of the day or something, where he would like just make fun of Trump supporters and Trump. He talked about how his wife was a nurse and he really didn't like anti-VAXXERs. Richard Trask was putting all this crazy stuff on Facebook. So, he was asked about his Facebook post. But the other thing that happened to Richard Trask is that he was arrested in Kalamazoo because he tried to kill his wife. He had a fetish for swingers. He and his wife had attended a swingers party. And then that night they got home and he assaulted her. He tried to kill her. He got on he bashed her head against the nightstand numerous times to the point where there's blood all over their sheet. You can see it in the body cam footage, guys, from when he was arrested. And then, so he bashed his wife's head against the nightstand, and then he tried to strangle her. And she's lucky to be alive. He then fled the scene in his underpants, intoxicated. And the local law enforcement said this guy is, he's FBI counterterrorism. He's probably armed and trained in law enforcement tactics. So they were concerned about arresting him, but they got him to answer the phone and meet them at a gas station parking lot. And the cops come, they open the door. He's got blood on his face and on his chest. He's shirtless. He's intoxicated. He acts like he has no idea what's going on, and he is arrested. He spends like one night in jail and pays like a $900 fine. If that were you or me, you'd be charged with attempted murder. It would be like a felony assault, But This is FBI privilege. He didn't even get charged with a DWI, even though he was clearly incredibly intoxicated when they picked him up and he met them at the parking lot there.
Prosecutorial immunity.
Yeah, so that's FBI privilege. And I know you brought up the article there of Jason Chambers talking about his private intelligence company. And I believe I included the images of some of the stuff I was holding up in that article. So people can go look at that.
So the FBI, we've got these clearly corrupt agents now working with this fabricator, if you will, not to discredit the fact that he served in Iraq. I'm not, it's not his fault that we were fighting an immoral war, but he fabricates a little bit and said, "Oh, I was in on rescuing Chris Kyle and whatnot." And is he a Michigan native?
I'm not sure,
but he was living in Michigan by this point.
He was living in Michigan, yes,
driving a contract mail truck.
Yes, and it's a weird so there's something really weird about Dan Chappell's story of how he became an informant for the FBI. It's very interesting because and I saw this once and I don't know where it was reported. I never saw it again. But
I got memory hold real quick is what you're saying.
Yeah, it got memory hold real quick that this guy, this main informant, Dan Chappell, he had a friend, Detective Ramirez, who may have been his landlord, right? The story I saw said that Detective Ramirez was his landlord. I don't know where I saw that story, but it was gone immediately. I saw it reported one time and then it disappeared and I never saw it again. But Detective Ramirez has come up in this case. And so apparently what Dan
He would be a
Chappell,
local PD detective.
yes, but there's something interesting about him. So
I'm not surprised at this point. You can't shock me with surprises anymore. I'm just
yes, I can imagine. So Dan Chappell, basically his story of how he became an informant in this case was that he was simply looking on Facebook for pro 2A groups because as a veteran, he was looking to maintain his perishable tactical skills. And he claims he stumbled upon the Facebook page for the Wolverine Watchman and that, in fact, Facebook had recommended it to him. I don't believe that's true for a minute. And I actually can verify now from information that has come out in one of the state cases that I can see there were only 13 members because we have in the discovery in that state case archive page of the Wolverine Watchman Facebook page. It had 13 members in March of 2020. It was a private Facebook group with only 13 members. So this is not something that if you're just browsing Facebook for pro 2A groups, you are not going to come across this page. You're going to come across all the big 2A groups first in Michigan, that have thousands of members. You're just not going to come across a private Facebook page. And you have to go through a vetting process to get into it. There's an automated vetting process where they ask you a couple questions, blah, blah, blah. You go through some hoops, then you can get into the private Facebook page. Well, he claims that he went through the automated vetting, got into the private group, and that they then, there were instructions to get into their encrypted group chat. He gets into the encrypted group chat and he claims he sees threats of violence against law enforcement. Now, what these threats are, it is unclear. It's like vague. He just says he saw threats of violence against law enforcement, which prompted him to go to his friend, Detective Ramirez. And then within 1 week, he's made an informant. So he claims that these threats, they just didn't document them, right? And it's the same story that their other informant has, where he claimed Steve Robeson, the FBI made him an informant in October of 2019. So this was before the Wolverine Watchman investigation even began. He was made an informant and he was citing threats of violence against law enforcement amongst 3%er group. So chatter of this stuff amongst 3%ers, that's his justification for becoming an informant. That's what they say in their own documents. So it's the same story. They both say that they saw threats of violence against law enforcement. Neither of it is documented. Steve Robeson says he heard chatter among 3%er groups. Says there's nothing documented. There's no proof that ever happened. Same with the Dan Chappell and him saying that he joins this group and sees threats of violence against law enforcement. That's basically the FBI's justification.
That's their inroad for everything.
For making this person an informant. But you would think, okay, so they have to document these threats, right? Isn't that their predicate for opening the investigation? Shouldn't that have been documented? They expect you to believe that they can access stuff you posted online 10 years ago that has long since been deleted, 15 different email addresses ago. They can go that far back into your internet history. They can uncover deleted stuff. They have access to everything. Oh, but this one time they can't find it. Whoops, please. I think not. And so it's just ludicrous. But he says that he contacted his friend, Detective Ramirez, and then his friend, somehow got him in touch with the FBI. Now, Detective Ramirez is on the Violent Gang Task Force of the Michigan Police. He had an FBI supervisor. Prior to any of this happening, he had an FBI supervisor because he's on this Violent Gang Task Force. Now, I don't think any of this is by accident or coincidental, because one of the things that has come out of the Michigan case is they have classified the Wolverine Watchman militia group as a violent criminal gang. They're now saying that, and it's interesting. So they're now trying to say that militia groups are violent gangs and then can now be put in the violent gang database. You can have special police departments and task forces with local, state, and federal law enforcement created to tackle violent gangs. So I found that very, very interesting because not one member of the Wolverine Watchmen has ever committed a violent crime. To call somebody a violent criminal gang, they've got to be engaged in a criminal enterprise. You have to show that they're engaged in criminal activity. You can't just say that they're a violent gang if they're not engaged in violence.
It's the tantamount to an assertion without proof is
Right.
it's just, well, it's not tantamount, it's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And there
That
again,
is-
it's a tactic that is used by every level of law enforcement. Oh, we're asserting that this is what you're doing. It's
yeah,
it's
we're just saying it.
it's no different than, you know, I don't care whether you like them or not, but there's a lot of these First Amendment auditors, and I've done a little bit of that myself, where you're just walking down the street taking pictures or video, and the cop comes up and goes, "You're suspicious." And that's exactly what they did with this is, oh, they're suspicious. They asserted that there was a crime, therefore we need to delve into this. And now we've got an inroad, an excuse to get our fingers into the cracks of the dam and pull it down. We're just going to blow this wide open. This is going to be, we're taking all the patriots down. All these militias are going to fall.
Well, it's a dangerous precedent because if they can create these task forces, then yes, they're going to infiltrate more militia groups, and we can expect more of these gay ops, glow ops, whatever you want to call them. These entrapment operations is what they are. And it's interesting too that Michigan, all of this goes down in Michigan because Michigan, of course,
was home of the Michigan militia.
Exactly. To other PatCon. Okay. Yep. There's other PatCon ties there. The Michigan militia is probably the most prominent and well-known militia in the country because they were in the Bowling for Columbine documentary, the big Michael Moore documentary. You know, it was like, yeah. So Michigan itself is very interesting just because of that, but also, and this is probably less well known, after 9/11 in 2002, Michigan passed a very specific anti-terrorism law. Now, what makes it unique is it has what it says about aiding and abetting. In their anti-terrorism law basically says that if you aid and abet a terrorist, you can face the same punishment that terrorist faces, right? It's sort of like a guilt by association thing. So that is unique to Michigan. It's a 2002 anti-terrorism law with this aiding and abetting enhancement or something. Now, with the Michigan thing, you had all these guys that were charged separately from the men that were charged federally. They were charged in state cases for what? Providing material support. What is providing material support? Aiding
like you said earlier, anything that they decide it is. Teaching somebody how to put a tourniquet on, like you said.
Or letting someone train on your property. Just being in the same chat group as some of these people that they later framed as terrorists. You're now aiding and abetting, or you're providing material support. And unfortunately, 3 of those guys have already been convicted and will spend 12 to 15 years in prison. There are 5 other men facing state charges. I'm sorry, 4 now, because Brian Higgins took a plea deal last week, probably feeling that this case is hopelessly political. There's no way these guys will get a fair trial. So
exactly. Even looking at Brandon's case, how in the world, how do you have any hope? Because Brandon's case is kind of a fluke if you look at everything else that happened.
It's a miracle. And I told him that, like, we'll get into that. But so you have these 4 guys now. Brian Higgins just took a plea deal, but their trial's coming up this summer in Antrim County right now. It's the Null brothers, Sean Fix, Eric Mulleter, and it was Brian Higgins. He took a plea deal because he probably felt he had no choice. But they all face the same charges, providing material support. And so it's just really insane. And they keep calling those guys, the 5 that are their trial's coming up. This is the second state case spun off from this thing. So there's so many people that are affected by this, by the way, just to put that out there. It's not over yet. Their trial comes up this summer. But yeah, this is where we are. So you provided material support because you allowed someone to train on your property. You taught someone how to tie a tourniquet. Now you go to jail. And this is the other issue with it is Gretchen Whitmer has already given victim impact statements in the federal case, and in the first state case, she gave a 3-minute victim impact statement at the state case for the 3 men that were charged there. And I think that's insane. First of all, it's so prejudicial. So Judge Wilson, he lets the court play her statement, and she's saying to the judge, to the jury, you need to, punish these men, send them a message. And all this talk about our sacred democracy, blah, 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 how she's been victimized. Meanwhile, she knew the entire time. The FBI kept her apprised of everything. She was never in any danger. She knew that the entire time. But she gave this statement, and it's highly prejudicial. And so just imagine you're trying to get a fair trial, but the victim in your case is your governor,
who gets all the airtime that she wants.
Yeah, and can get on, make a press conference, smear you, lie about you, call you a white supremacist, call you a Trump supporter, even though you weren't, and all this other stuff. She's allowed to get up there and lie. That's fine. But just imagine, like the judge is he's supposed to be lenient on these guys after his governor just told him throw the book at these men. And again, like a judge is going to oppose their governor. Like, oh, let's give these guys a fair hearing. I don't think so.
Right.
It's not going to happen. Joe Biden called.
And you can't get a change of venue out of state on a state case.
Exactly. So there's huge issues, and everything has become so politicized. They use that to their advantage as well. You have all these people who just don't care if they think that you're a Trump supporter or whatever. They think that it doesn't matter. You should just go to jail because I don't like you and you have a different opinion than me. And I've decided that you're a bigot or something. People are just so ignorant, and they don't understand what they're doing or how that could happen to them next. They're sitting here cheering as the January 6th people are treated like foreign terrorists. Well, that's going to be them next. There's no thinking of, oh, gee, maybe, the stuff I'm cheering for to happen to my political enemies, maybe the day will come it happens to me.
Meghan McCain said she wanted all of them taken down to Guantanamo Bay and treated like the terrorists there. So, I mean, waterboarding for everyone.
Exactly. And that's the other thing. They themselves have said, the FBI has announced a domestic war on terror. So you have to consider also how some of the factors from that have played into this, right? Where you had, think about the excesses of the global war on terror, things like indefinite detention, enhanced interrogation, extraordinary rendition, all of these things. They're no longer focused on that. They're now turning all of these tools inward on the American people. That's the new threat that they've created. And we could argue too, like when they compare these guys to ISIS, like what are they really saying about that? Is that another tongue-in-cheek thing of like, hey, we created ISIS too, didn't we? Didn't the US government create ISIS? Yeah, they morphed out of like Al-Qaeda, which came from the Mujahideen, which was created, armed, trained by the CIA against the Soviets, Yeah. So it's just one of those interesting things where
every single thing that the federal state and the state and whatever level of the state you want to touches morphs into something that ultimately ends up hurting us. Like there's just no way around it. And that has played true or been demonstrated to be true in the case of law enforcement across the board. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on to talk about this, is because we've got to get people to wake up and understand the totality of what this, you said something that, if people were paying attention, and I have a friend that was watching. I don't know if she's still here. Sarah was active in a city that's an hour away from me, but I've gone over there to help them with some school board stuff. And I know you're gonna pick up on where I'm going with this right away. This national, or this federal domestic war on terrorism, or war on domestic terrorism, or however you want to say it, is so powerful, because all they have to do is just label you a domestic terrorist, and they did that with school boards.
Yes, they did.
They
That's
did,
right.
absolutely did that with school boards, and told people in school boards, or told people, we're watching these people and treating them like terrorists.
That's
Folks,
right.
like, if you and I know you've heard this term. I think I've heard you guys use it when you were talking with Jose. You got to be looking around for the glowy in your group now. You gotta, like, if I look around, everybody's a freaking glowy to me. And
Yeah.
if you don't know, a glowy is that person who just they fit too perfectly. They just fit too perfectly, and they're always the person that wants you to do violence, like actually commit crimes.
Yep. They're the loud mouth that is saying, you're wasting our time. We need to have a plan. We need to have concrete objectives. If you hear people talking like that, they're questionable.
Right. And that doesn't mean that every person is. And that, it's, there is a place for, loud and vocal protests, and there is a place for loud and vocal, no, we're not moving, and that was, but it's the person who that's their answer all the time. It's, I go to great lengths to tell people, like, I'm a non-aggressionist. I am anti-aggression. I don't believe that anybody should be doing violence to anything or anyone. You have to emphasize that, because the glowies come in and they're like, no violence right now. It's just
all the time.
It's
even though that never works, or they're constantly trying to get people to agitate in the streets and stuff, like protests work, for like affecting political change or something. I always find that funny when people say stuff like that. Oh, we need to be out in the streets. Like, what's the last time that actually accomplished anything? Not for you. It's different when the other side does it. They're allowed to burn down cities. We're not.
Well, and we don't want to.
We don't want to.
But what the setup is that you want to. The other side, it just happened. They didn't want it to happen.
And you have, God bless them too, the older crowd, our boomers, I love them, that say things, like, oh, well, these are our rights and we need to exercise them while we have them. We have the right to peaceably assemble. And I'm like, it's really cute that you think that you do, but like, you don't anymore, right. Like, that's what happened on J6, and we all know where that went. But you could look at prior to that, there was a march just in December of 2020, literally like the month before, totally peaceful.
Right.
Tons of people showed up. They called it the Million MAGA March. I went down there. I interviewed people, like did man on the street interviews. Everything was fine. Everybody was peaceful, and then this is what happens. So, like, we think we have these rights, like we have the right to freedom of speech, freedom of association. No, you don't. You think you do. And you have them until the government decides that it's no longer convenient for you to have the facade of having them anymore. And then they take them from you, like they did to Brandon, and throw you in jail for 18 months for a crime you didn't commit. Right. And they have no problem doing that, and that's, again, or they try to charge you for providing material support because you let someone use your property or taught someone how to tie a tourniquet. You do not have freedom of association. That was an association. They call it providing material support or aiding and abetting now. You don't have these things. You think you do. You don't. What's so dangerous, I think, about the American system, and I'll wrap it up. I know we've been going for a long time, but
I do want to touch on, finish your thought on the American system, okay. But I finish your thought on the American system or what's so funny about it. But then I want you to go to Brandon and how he was exonerated.
I've spent a lot of time studying the communism, and I've looked at what happened in 1917 and the Bolshevik Revolution, right, and what the system was like under the Soviets.
Yep.
I've read Solzhenitsyn, and it's very interesting to think about. So they understood that they were being oppressed. They knew people were going to go to the gulags and stuff like that. I think the American system is far more sinister because
Yes.
we are in a totalitarian police state, but we have this illusion of a Western liberal democracy. And that illusion is so dangerous.
Yeah.
That's what's dangerous, because people don't really understand what the situation is and how dire it is. And,
Yes.
how your life can change dramatically, when something small happens, and they have this naive fairy tale, and I almost think that's more sinister, is the illusion of freedom,
Yep.
or democracy.
In the
when you
worst,
really
the
have
worst
it.
part of it. I'm sorry, I cut you off. I didn't mean to.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, we don't really have that,
Yeah.
though. I mean,
The-
we don't know, but we don't know who the enemy is, though, because of this. Like, everyone knew in Russia that the Soviets were the problem, and they knew what they were doing. They knew
Right.
who was doing it and why, and what their ideology was. They were
until
vocal.
it creeped in so much that they didn't know.
Yeah, right.
And I think it was in Romania where after Ceausescu fell, and fell is probably not the right word, was put up against the wall, along with his wonderful and peaceful and pleasant wife. The secret police files were opened up, and they had to have counselors there with people saying, are you sure you want to read this? Because you're probably not going to like what you find out about who turned you in.
About
And
how many of your family and friends
are the ones responsible for you being thrown in the prison and
that were
tortured.
informers.
And I was having, you were saying about the thing about the way our system works today. I was having this conversation with a friend today that a lot of people are like, I'm fed up. I'm not putting up with this anymore. It's time for us to stand up and say enough is enough. I frequently like to quote Gandalf from the movie, not from the books, which are, by the way, far better. But from the movie, when he slams his staff down and the Balrog's coming up and he says, none shall pass. Right. And we get a lot of people that are there, the patriotic mindset of like, bam, none shall pass. You've gone this far, you'll go no further.
No more.
And I'm like, no, you will. You're not going to be that guy.
Exactly.
And I said this to my friend. He's a great guy. Respect him, love him to death. But you're not going to be. You're not willing to sacrifice. You're not. You're just not willing, because comfort is so important to you, and they have geared us towards that.
Oh my God, right? Look at France right now, because they want to raise the age of retirement or
to
something.
65.
You're going to burn the entire country down.
But it's the French.
They're shutting down streets. And I'm sorry, but I've been looking at these videos from France, and they've got everybody out there. Like, that's one thing about Europe that I find interesting, that they
could get everybody on the streets in a day.
Yes, and their convoy, like in Canada, the convoy too. I keep thinking, when is this going to happen here in America? How come I can't get? We couldn't get 100 people to show up outside the DC Gulag. Ashley Babbitt's mom had been going down there every single night, just trying to get people to show up. Couldn't get 100 people to show up. Why? And it's always like that. I can't get people to show up for any of the Whitmer stuff. I'm trying to fund my documentary right now. I'm still fundraising for it. And it is so difficult, but people will dump money into nonsense and stupid. You have these Twitch streamers that show some cleavage and they're getting $2 million a month.
Christina, you're not willing to show cleavage to raise money for your...
Nope, sorry guys. There will be no OnlyFans here.
You know what? You could do an OnlyFans, because it did start out as a fundraising thing for workout coaches.
Oh my God, did we hit 5K?
So
let's go. All right. I did.
Yeah, you are now up over you haven't even checked today. I was like, breaking news, Christina.
You know what's funny. I have not. So since I've started fundraising for this documentary, I have not actually touched any of the money I've raised yet. Because as you can see, my goal is quite high, and I know that's what I need to do this and do it done. To get it done right. So I figured I'm not really gonna start utilizing the funds until I know I'm going to get enough to complete the project. Even a bare bones enough to complete it. So I haven't taken any of the money yet. That was raised, and I haven't been following it too much. I just wanted to see where we would get, because so far I paid for everything out of my own pocket.
So here's
I have funded my trips.
Since we have this up here before we get to Brandon.
Yes.
Anybody who donates to Christina on her Give Send Go for the kidnap and kill and FBI terror plot, anybody who does that, I will give them a $5 credit towards any of my merchandise. Whether it's a bag of whether it's a bag of my coffee. I just got my most recent shipment in, or any of the merchandise.
So cool.
So anybody who donates, but it can't be $5. It can't be $1.
There you go.
It's got to be at least 10 to get the 5. So anybody who donates $10 or more gets $5 credit. And I don't know if that's going to help or not, but they have to also be able to screenshot, not like right before you send the 10, but like an actual, like where it shows. And so that's the catch. You got to be able to prove it was you.
Yeah,
and that you
no
actually
cheating.
did it. No cheating. Not
No
that any of my
cheating.
friends or fans would do that, but
I don't think they would.
But yeah, so I was telling this buddy of mine today, I said, you just love your comfort. And we all, for the most part, we all do. Most of us are not really ready to sacrifice. And I've been calling people out on that a lot.
People are so fucking soft, though. I hate to say it. I hate to swear.
There's the hardcore Orthodox right there.
I get so mad, sometimes about the softness, the decadence, of this country and the rot and stuff. It's just very depressing, very sad. But like you said, people like as long as people can come home from work and put on their dang Netflix and smoke a bong or something, that they will do that. You could slowly take everything from them, but if you leave the bong and the Netflix, they won't notice until you take the couch literally out from under them.
They may not even notice if you take the couch. If you turn off the Netflix and take the bong out of their hand, they're going to get real upset. Or the bourbon, or whatever the case might be.
That's right. Whatever it is, there's so many different addictions, though.
And I'm not opposed to people enjoying downtime and having having a nice drink or any of that. But it's just it's so all consuming.
Yeah, the problem is that when it becomes a lifestyle and there's just this culture of apathy, I don't know what this is. I don't know if it's just the younger generation has become so jaded and cynical and black-pilled that they just have checked out completely, though.
But it's a different type of checkout, because there are people my age, and there again, I know I'm older than you, and I don't know how much older, but whether it's my age or young, or in between this really young generation and myself, or even the older generation, so many people like it. The other one, and I had somebody, I was talking about 15-minute cities with somebody today, and he's like, that's not going to happen in my lifetime. I'm like, bro, it's going to happen to you next week. The next week. This is happening to you next week. You mean I'm not going to be able? No, they're going to start it next week. What do you mean? I'm like, the Federal Reserve is already handing out the marching orders to all the banks across the United States to start going cashless. Yeah,
the Fed Now system, it's coming. Look at there's a website that tracks every single country that is already testing or utilizing CBDCs. It's well over 100 countries have already started using testing CBDCs, or they're just using them outright altogether. Look at Nigeria, they just switched over and they're trying to get everybody to start using their CBDC. This is happening, guys. There's an agenda, and it's all being planned. But one of the weird things I've noticed with young people, so the younger generations, number one, the cost of living has gone up so much that most of these people are completely priced out of like the housing market. So they don't own homes. They're like renters, they switch jobs all the time. They switch homes all the time. they're childless. Like most of them don't have kids. They're told not to have kids. The kids ruin your lives, or kids are so expensive people feel like they can't have children, that they won't be able to afford them. So you have these younger generations that are in arrested development. They are essentially grown children. They have not become actual adults yet. So they're in this stage of arrested development where they are ostensibly an adult, but then they go into this weird geek communities, or these weird, so there's the simps that are throwing tons of money at OnlyFans because they enjoy parasocial relationships with these women online, because they don't have any actual friends in real life or any real interactions with women that are not transactional and are positive. Or they go into like the geek communities. They're into their weird Star Wars things, or they're grown men with action figures and toys, and it's like, what is going on?
I thought you were going to say something about bronies, and I was going to be like,
no, we will not even get into the bronies, but you understand where this is going with the weird communities and stuff like that. This is literally what young people are. They're in Discord servers for transgenderism, or they're adopting these bizarre identities, where they have 17 different mental disorders and 16 different personalities. And we're supposed to validate this. It's a vapid, bizarre world. It's clown world. But I look at that and I see this is what happens. This is a godless.
And that's why these things happen.
This is a country under judgment. That, and I believe it. I believe that's what's happening. I think, look at everything we've done in the world, in our adventurisms, our empire expansion, running around, doing things like the war on terror. And now all of that's coming back on us. Now it's the domestic war on terror. So all the things we did to all these other countries, now we're going to start experiencing that, because that's the stuff we've been doing. And I do think we're under a sort of judgment. And I think it's difficult when you have the younger generations who are very much just grown children, and if they don't have their own kids, like they don't feel a need or a desire to preserve liberty and pass it on to the next generation because they don't have kids.
Right.
Why should they care what happens? They don't.
So to wrap it up in it's not often I meet my match when it comes to conversation.
Oh, thank you.
and I mean that in a complimentary way, not in a rattling on way.
Way. Okay.
No. But to kind of wrap it up, because this, if I have my way, this won't be your last time on, because I really do think there's a lot more for us to talk about, the way a lot of this stuff ties together. But
yeah, for sure.
Let's talk briefly about Brandon Concerta, right? That's how he says his last name, Brandon Concerta, and his charges, but ultimately how he was exonerated.
Yeah.
Because let's have a white pill.
Let's end it on a white pill.
White
okay.
pill, yeah.
So Brandon,
or let's not say white pill, because we wouldn't want to offend anybody who thinks that a white pill is the only good thing.
Right.
We don't want to.
We'll end it on a positive note, we'll say.
So go ahead, white pill us.
All right. So you could, I don't know how much of a white pill it will be, but I'll share Brandon's story. So Brandon, just a regular guy, remember again the time frame of like the things that are going on in 2020. Grand Rapids was one of the cities that experienced rioting and looting, right? So these guys saw what happens when stuff like that kicks off, and the law enforcement does not respond. They saw people their stores being looted, people being pulled out and like beaten, and just no police showing up. And so in their minds, they're like, hey, I need to learn to protect myself. I need to get better with defensive firearms training, whatever, even medical training. There's a reason for that. If this is what you're seeing happening, and you combine that with some of the unconstitutional mandates coming from Gretchen Whitmer really were affecting people personally. One of these guys, one of the guys that got charged in the state case, his girlfriend lost her family restaurant because of these lockdown orders. So like they're losing their businesses that have been in their family for generations because of what happened in 2020. Like that really did hurt and affect some people more than others. One of those guys was being evicted from his home. He was even leaving the state of Michigan because of this. He was leaving in June of 2020. Paul Bellar, they still charged him with providing material support. He's in jail right now. He was convicted. And so that you look at that, though, and you see, number one, just how tragic it is that these really were the most vulnerable people in society. They were the ones affected the most by her mandates. But then the frame of mind of people like Brandon, who was doing very well for himself, by the way, he's a machinist. He was like, yeah, I want to get better with firearms and medical training, whatever. And he's like a big liberty guy, a big gun guy. That's just what he's into. He met somebody online that basically said, hey, there's these group of guys in your area. They do this militia training, defensive medical training. Why don't you go check them out? And he gave him the contact of one of these guys that was in the Wolverine Watchmen. So Brandon, he doesn't even show up until like June. So he walks into an active TEI investigation. He has no idea that the first militia training he attends with this group, he is walking into a place that is swarming with informants and federal agents.
And that's really key, because it wasn't at this point just the informants. Now it's actual agents are coming in undercover at this point.
Oh yeah.
And I do want to insert this because I had Steve Friend on just a few weeks ago, and I know you know who Steve is.
Yeah, Steve's awesome.
I had Steve on just a few weeks ago, and that was one of the things when he was called up there to be part of that SWAT team that were to go take these guys down. They were like, these guys are well trained and well armed, and he's thinking, okay. He even says, okay, and then they watch the video, and he's like, these guys are as good, if not better, than we are. And then he said it was after the fact. It's because he found out they were armed and trained by FBI SWAT teams.
Yeah, that's why he's like, oh, wait, why are their skills on par with us? Oh, that's why, because we've been training them. Steve was awesome, by the way. Fantastic guy.
I mean, it's just,
that's another positive note, by the way, to end it on. We'll add Steve Friend to that, because that is one thing, it's not very
often. It woke
him
up.
Yeah, not very often where you can actually point to one of these FBI agents and say, hey, look, there's a couple good guys left in there that will do the right thing. Kyle Seraphim and Steve Friend are two of those men that deserve, to have that credit to them, that they were, we often, I shit on the FBI all day, every day, but there are still some.
They make a good toilet, so.
They do, and they deserve it, and it's with good reason, and they know it, and I'm trying to help them and better their agency. And I think that the good ones there understand that that's what I'm trying to do, and I think a lot of people inside that agency probably do agree with me. I think that for many of them, it's cowardice, but also, as we've learned too, they know that they won't be protected if they come forward as a whistleblower. They're seeing what happens to other people that
Kyle and Steve are perfect examples.
Exactly. And how they'll take everything from you. They don't give a damn.
Right.
They'll ruin your life. So going back to Brandon, though.
Yeah, so Brandon walks into this training, this very first time he goes to something with the Wolverine Watchmen, and it's just like, there's like 12 regular Joes there, and then all the other people are informants or FBI agents for this. And he shows up, and this is happening.
Yeah, that's right. And keep in mind, too, that these guys are arrested in October. So we're talking about literally just a few months. So July, August, September, October. That's 4 months, right? So he meets these guys 4 months later. He's being arrested. That is how quickly your life can change. And it could just be because you attended 3 training exercises. They kept calling him a member of the Wolverine Watchmen also. He was never a member of the group. He just attended a training. He never went through the process to become a member. He was not a longtime member. He was not a militia guy. That's the other thing, that where there's a smear on these guys of, oh, these were militia guys. No, most of them were not actually militia members. it was during this time that they got interested in trying to learn how to defend themselves. So they joined militia groups. You had an influx of people that like, hey, I can get access to this training. There are people that conduct this kind of training. It costs thousands of dollars. I know, because I'm trying to take the self-defense classes myself, because I'm a woman, you know. I have a little like Taurus handgun, you know, and I got to get better at it. But like, I understand the cost of like trying to learn how to physically defend yourself in any kind of bad situation. You know, people pay thousands of dollars to learn those skills. So if it's being provided and you can attend and it's free to attend,
Free.
you're
Yep.
gonna go. That's the other
Yeah.
thing. They knew, they made this stuff as attractive as possible. These events, by the way, they were billed as family friendly events, just to give your guys an understanding of like, what is an FTX? What is a field training exercise? What do they do? These events were billed as family friendly. So you're on private property. They have it set
Having a
up with
picnic.
different hanging targets. There's barrel training here. There's medical training there. There's hanging steel targets here, whatever. The FBI had already set it all up. That's another thing too, where like the government says in certain things they claim that like, oh, you know, they were practicing in a kill house because they were practicing for when they were going to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer. The government claims that they modeled their shoot house after her vacation cottage and that they were practicing to kidnap her. Well, that's not true at all. It was the government. The FBI set up the tactical training and the whole layout. Like, these guys showed up and the FBI had everything laid out already. This was something Brandon told me, that it wasn't like they showed up and said, hey, like,
Nope, this chair needs to be there and that
No,
wall needs to be
you
there.
show up and there's a chain of command and a structure, you know, like Dan, the main informant, he's the XO, he's their commanding officer. He's telling people what to do. They've already set up different stations. They put different people in charge of different stations. So Daniel Harris is in charge of medical training this day. He's teaching people how to dress wounds. You know, you have somebody else in charge of barrel training. Someone else is in charge of something else. And so you're showing up, everything's already set up, and the FBI is the one that set it up, and the FBI is the one running everybody through it. The FBI is the one conducting the tactical training. The FBI is the one.
And to be clear, they're not there in their
recommending
FBI
people.
jackets and their badges out there. They're
No.
dressed like they're like Michiganders.
Yeah, like exactly. You'd have no
It's got
idea.
it's a lot of plaid, a
Yep.
lot of mullets.
That's right. And they're telling people too that these are family friendly events. You can bring your kids. So they're grilling food. They've got hot wings, beer. They're doing big campfires. You know, they all bring their wives and kids. So
The kids are drinking the beer. It's Michigan.
so you can imagine though, like, this is what you're showing up to. It's not like this big scary thing. You know, one of these FTXs was literally at a little girl's birthday party. So she's having a pool party, you know, and then they're doing this training at the same day on the same property, and they're bringing their kids. These FBI informants, by the way, you know, one of the things that people have said to me is, oh, how did these guys not know they were surrounded by cops? You know, you have to be really stupid. How'd they not see the red flags? I'm so smart. This would never happen to me. I would know better. I would figure it out. And it's like, you wouldn't know. These guys, these FBI informants brought their kids with them to events, and they would pray with these people and their children. They'd bring their kids to play with the target of their investigations kids, and they'd all sit down and pray together.
Yeah.
They're going on vacation together, you know. Steve Robeson's taking Barry Croft down to the beach in South Carolina, telling him to bring his kids. And Steve's bringing his kids. Now, unbeknownst to Barry, Steve Robeson is a pedophile. The FBI hid that, though, so that no one would know while he was working for them. So the FBI is employing pedophiles and career criminals, and then knowingly allowing them to be around other people's children. This is
But they're protecting us.
Yeah, right. So Brandon attended 3 of these FTXs. That was it. They opened so I've seen the FBI's paperwork. You know, I've seen all of the discovery from Brandon's file. He showed me. their paperwork for their justification for opening an investigation into him. They don't even open an investigation into Brandon until August of 2020, and these guys are arrested in October. So August, September, October. It was getting down to the wire, and they knew it. And the FBI kept trying to get people to come up with a plan or do something illegal. Nothing was happening. There was no plan. So the FBI introduces undercover agents, UCE, Mark, and Red, and they try to get these guys to buy explosives. So we've talked about the WMD charges and the different stories there of the firework with the pennies taped to it, the black powder in the balloon that poofed, and the different stories there. They kept trying to get these guys basically to come up with explosives, because one of their elements here was they say these guys were going to blow up a bridge to slow down law enforcement response or something, and they got Adam to get out of the car and take a picture under the bridge like an idiot. He didn't know better. So they really need something that where they can show that there's something here, right? Because no one's been able to this day to actually show any evidence of a conspiracy to do anything.
Right.
There should be evidence of that. If someone's involved in a conspiracy, typically they're in communication with their co-defendants that they're in a conspiracy with. These guys aren't even in communication with each other. You can't show the phone calls where they're planning stuff. You cannot show any element of a furtherance of a criminal conspiracy. Anytime you pull a thread, it falls apart. It's all smoke and mirrors. They have these clips that they play of intoxicated ramblings where guys are saying, that bitch Whitmer, we're going to fly her over the lake on a kite, or we're going to commandeer Black Hawk helicopters, take control of the airspace, and we're going to march on the, it's like shit that's from a movie that is not ever going to happen in the real world, that these guys are drunk and stoned.
Well, they're all perfectly trained helicopter pilots. That's how easy it is to take.
Yeah, and they're just going to go commandeer
driving
a
car.
Black Hawk.
Yeah.
Right.
Because there's no security around Black Hawk. So.
The FBI had a reason to be very concerned about these drunk, stoned men commandeering the Blackhawks.
I mean, if we had to be held accountable for every stupid thing we said while we were under the influence of anything.
Oh my God. Could you imagine?
So what were they, was there something specific that they were pushing on Brandon to do, or was it just the fact that he had been to 3 of these FTXs?
It's just the fact that he looks scary. He'd gone to their FTXs, and Brandon is very vocal.
He's really not that scary looking either. I've seen far worse.
He'd been making videos on YouTube, which, by the way, the FBI encouraged him to do. He'd been making YouTube videos where he had the anarchy flag behind him. They were trying to make him the poster boy for that. And he would go on these kind of rants on social media. He talked about the Zionist bankers and stuff. And it's funny because that's literally what's mentioned in the FBI file of why they opened an investigation into him. They're like, well, he has these books and he has said these things. And it's like, okay, so literally his political opinions, but he never committed a crime. And that's fine to the FBI. They will say that in their own paperwork, well, yeah, we're investigating him for his politics because he said this. And that's anti-government sentiment, they call it, or whatever. That's their new thing, is an anti-government rhetoric or anti-government sentiment. That's the latest
Which
thing.
Is ironic because all of our founding fathers would have been tried.
Of course, they all would have been DTs, or whatever. So poor Brandon, I mean, he attends 3 of these events. He, at one point, they tried to so they knew they had to roll these guys up soon. And Dan Chappell, one of the informants, he's trying to get Brandon alone because they've got to try to work all of these guys and try to frame them and make them look bad. So Dan goes to Brandon's house. He spends 4 hours there recording everything Brandon's saying. And what was he doing? He was asking him hypotheticals. He kept trying to get him to talk about violence. And Brandon's not a violent person, so he just is talking about his philosophical beliefs for hours. This informant is like, come on, can I get this guy to say anything bad that I can use? finally, towards the end of it, after 4 hours, this informant is like, fuck it, I can't take it anymore. What about, what makes you really mad? Is there anything that makes you really mad? And Brandon goes, contact tracing. I don't like that. And he goes, well, what would you do if someone was like contact tracer showed up and tried to forcibly vaccinate you? And then this is where they got their sound clip. Brandon said, well, fuck that. If they come here trying to stick me with a needle, I'll take them all out. He's doing his tough guy talk. Like if someone tries to come here,
which is literally what every single person in the upper Midwest who doesn't live in a major metro area has said.
No one wants to be forcibly vaccinated. It's what anyone would say, all right? But basically, they wanted him saying something that made him sound dangerous or violent.
Yep.
And it took 4 hours of just, well, what makes you really mad?
And there again, that's the entire law enforcement playbook.
Yeah.
Push and push and push. Especially when it's with, an informant or an undercover, is to push you and 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 push you.
Yeah.
And if that's, and by the way, if you're in a group of people and you're finding that there's that one person that every conversation they're pushing you to say something radical, that's a glowy.
That's right.
That's a glow or a Fed.
Or if they ask a lot of hypotheticals. If somebody's asking you, like, what makes you really mad, hypothetically speaking, when would you do this or something? That's a big clue they're trying to get you to expound on, something that it's just any kind of clip to make you sound bad or dangerous or violent. So this is literally what happened to Brandon. If you think it can't happen to you, you are incorrect.
So he ends up getting charged.
Yeah.
Off of that information, this 4-hour conversation, the fact that he goes to
in the wrong place at the wrong time. You showed up to the wrong training on the, at the wrong time.
And he goes to trial. He refuses to take a plea.
Yeah.
He fights this in court and he's exonerated.
Yeah. On his birthday.
That's happy freaking birthday. Yeah.
Yeah. If that's not a miracle, I mean, and God showing you that he's involved and that his hand is on this, I don't know what is. To be exonerated on your birthday in a case like this, where these prosecutors, these cops have a 99.9% conviction rate, they almost never get their ass handed to them. At that first trial, they got 0 convictions. 2 people were exonerated. 2 people they declared a mistrial on, and they had to retry them. And that was even more egregious, but that's a whole other story. So for Brandon, like, that's what happened. For people to, just so you understand, like, this can happen to you. You can be in the wrong place at the wrong time. You can show up, or look at what's happening to the J6 people. You can show up to one event, and every other Trump rally was fine that you've been to for the past 4 years. You can show up to one thing though and have everything go completely wrong. And there's no way to really know, but this is what can happen to you. So he spent 18 months in prison. And he told me, like, when they arrested him and they brought him down to interrogate him, the FBI people were like getting in his face. And he's like, what am I, arrested with? Like, what am I being charged with? And they said conspiracy to kidnap Whitmer. And he said, for what? Like, he didn't even know. What would people be kidnapping her for? For what? Like, what would you do with her? You're going to hold her ransom or something? What are you going to do with her once you have her? Like, he couldn't even conceive of, like, what would be the purpose of doing something like that, because it's just so nonsensical.
And it's foreign to him,
like,
from everything I've heard you say about him. Yeah.
What, though?
Right. And he's he's literally a nonviolent guy.
Yeah, and he just was like, what would be the purpose of that? And they're like, well, you tell us,
and that's something else that people need to understand. And that a person can be nonviolent and still practice to defend themselves because they're nonviolent. And that's all Brandon was doing. Christina, this has been an amazing conversation. I know I definitely want to have you back on and we'll talk off air a little bit more about the direction that we can go with another conversation, because I think there's a lot for us to talk about, but I know you're busy
so much
too.
More. Yeah.
But you tell Brandon to reply to my reply because I'm
Okay.
working on getting him on, and I know he's clearly probably incredibly busy as well, and probably has his own life. But I
Yeah.
really want to have him come on and tell his story, even if it's only a half an hour. If he doesn't want to talk for too long, or if he feels like he's doesn't want to put himself out there. It sounds like he's okay talking about it, but
He is. He
I
is.
tell him that you are giving him directions.
Okay. I'll crack the whip.
Crack the whip, Christina.
No, but
And
Brandon is a great resource of information.
yeah,
If you guys think I know this case,
he
like
knows the inside.
he spent 18 months literally only looking at the discovery in this case. He knows it better than me, and in some
And
ways
they ruined his life, or
he's
attempted to ruin his life.
exactly, and he has a little bit different perspective from me. So the way he just explains things is different than the way I do, which I think is really interesting. I've gone through and looked at some of the footage that I've already shot with him for different things, and I'm like, yeah, like he has a different way of explaining basically the same thing that I'm trying to say. He has a different way of saying it, and I think that sometimes that's helpful, just to get somebody explaining it that has literally lived through it. No matter what, I can tell you, I did not personally live through this. I've talked to many people that have.
You've probably
but
been traumatized by talking about it. So
I have, and I have my own things going on. So we'll just briefly discuss that, right? Since I've been, doing the documentary, I was filming with Adam and Barry while they were in Newaygo County Prison. They were participating in my documentary. I got statements from them for the weaponization committee, put those statements out. The next day, Adam and Barry were both moved to Supermax facilities, Adam in Florence, Barry in Terre Haute. So they're no longer able to have any contact with me. They've effectively silenced these guys. Adam's new cellmate in Florence is a murderer. Adam is somebody who had zero criminal record prior to this. He's never been in jail before. He's never been in trouble before. To put him in somewhere like Florence Supermax is literally insane, and they're probably trying to kill him. The other thing is that a lot of the guys in Supermax are serving life sentences. You're already serving a life sentence for murder. What's one more? Maybe you get some money in your commissary or whatever. Something very bad could happen, though, is the point. At Barry's sentencing, the prosecutor, the U.S. attorney, read quotations out in court of his interviews with me that we were conducting while he was in prison. They were saying, oh, he's talking to the media. He's doing interviews. He still isn't taking responsibility. And they said he was radicalized and unrepentant. And it's like, he didn't do anything. You guys framed him. And because he's telling people that you did that, now he's, like ISIS and the blind sheik. They literally compared him to the blind sheik. They said, oh, when Barry talked about wanting to restore the constitutional republic, that's actually no different than ISIS saying they want to restore a caliphate. They said that about Barry, which is just insane. So obviously the government is not happy about the documentary. They quoted quotes from my interview with Barry at his sentencing hearing. They sent him to jail for 20 years. They gave Adam 16 years, but the government had said Adam was the ringleader for 2 years prior to this. So they give Barry more time than Adam, but Adam's the ringleader. And that was strange because at Barry's sentencing, they had just given Adam 16 years and said he was the ringleader. Then the next day at Barry's sentencing, they say, actually, he's the ringleader.
It's because they can say whatever they want because they're not held to the same standard as everybody else.
That's right.
Yeah.
So they're obviously ass mad about the documentary. I think that's funny.
I think you just coined a new phrase on my show. Every single show, my guests always manage to say something I've never heard before, and I'm like, I'm going to make it through an entire episode. And Christina, the one person I thought was going to come at me with something I never heard before, isn't going to do it. And there she is, right towards the end of the show. Ass mad.
So the government's ass mad about the documentary. And so it is it's disconcerting though that Adam and Barry have been moved to the Supermax while they're supposed to be appealing what happened at the retrial, because that we haven't even gotten into that. That'll have to be the subject for another interview though. We'll talk about that. But
I don't do interviews, we do convos.
Okay. The situation is dire, though, for them.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's bad. We really don't know what's going on. We're not really able to be in
Are
contact.
they in a comm unit? Are they both kind of in a comm unit where there's very limited communications?
No communications, basically. No. 23-hour-a-day lockdown in Supermax, and they're allowed one 15-minute phone call per month. One phone call per month. 15 minutes. That's it.
And that's normally to their attorney.
Right. And their attorneys haven't been able to speak with them since they've been moved to Supermax. That's the other thing. So it was weird because we knew that they would be moved out of Nuevo County eventually. We knew after their sentencing they would be moved, but we thought they would have more time, and we assumed that they would go back to the holding facilities they were in prior to Nuevo. So like, a medium, security or prison, whatever. Where they'd still have access to like talk to people. I used to do 40-minute long video visits with Barry and Adam. You could do video visits. They could call me numerous times a day as long as they had money in their commissaries. $5 for a 15-minute phone call, by the way, if you want to know how, what a rape of the pocketbook the prison system is, and for these families that have spent thousands of dollars just trying to communicate with their loved ones. It's insane. That needs to be reformed. But we did not think they would go to Supermax, and they're appealing, so we thought maybe they wouldn't be moved until after their appeal. So when that happened, after their statements to the weaponization committee were published, like for them to be moved to Supermax the next day, it's obviously to punish them. There's no legitimate reason for them to be there. Their lawyers even said that. They said they were supposed to go to a low-max prison, not a Supermax. They have no reason being in there. That's reserved for actual criminals, or violent people. These guys didn't do anything. They were charged with conspiring to do something, which of course was the government conspiring, not them. So that's where we're at right now.
Yeah, it's one of these, you talked about, well, we've been going on for a while, but it's one of these kind of, there's just, where's your breaking point in this story? I mean, it's just like you're making a documentary, and I'm sure you're probably going to try and, have it be at a decent runtime. But like, how do you figure that out? That's like this part. That's why, conversations like this, I'm like, I'm going to have you back, because like you've said several times, I could go on for 10 hours. Well, no, I can't. So, but if we started on Saturday morning, maybe. And
I promise there will be stuff in the documentary you haven't heard of. I'm not telling everything. Right. I go and I do interviews. I try to promote the documentary, but there will be stuff in the documentary that you've never heard before. There will be. We want to make sure that we save some of that information for the documentary, because I think it's very important. But yeah, the timeline of this, right? It does go back to the PatCon, so that has to be in the documentary. You have to touch on PatCon a little bit, and then it's like these cases are still going on, though. You still have the state case. The documentary doesn't even touch on these state cases, so that'll have to be a part 2 or something, just that. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what to expect. I guess you guys can expect a multi-part series.
Yeah, well, I'd like to do. I definitely want to have you back on, because I like the way that you think through things, and you're not afraid to touch on issues that even allegedly alternative media sources don't want to touch on these days.
Yeah.
And like I said earlier, the biggest thing is that if you critique anybody in the law enforcement world, you're immediately labeled you're anti-cop, you're anti-law and order. And like literally the reason these critiques are coming from you and from me and some of the others now are because we do respect law and order, but we have an expectation that it's got to be done right. not just so that the ends justify the means.
That's
And
right.
that's what we're dealing with now, is that the ends are geared toward justifying the means. Any step the FBI or your local law enforcement agency wants to take, as long as they get the conviction, as long as they get the man, even if they have to make up the man. And it goes to the old saying, I think it was, maybe it might have been Lenin or Stalin, show me the man, I'll show you the crime.
Exactly.
And
That's right.
and that's where we're at now.
And Lenin also said the best way to control the opposition is to lead it, which is exactly what the FBI does when they create these fake groups.
And we saw that now with the breaking news just this week about the January day. We've already mentioned it several times, so I mean, I'm like, this video, this conversation is not going to get monetized anytime ever.
No.
It's going to be completely unadvertised as suitable. But DC Metro Police had undercover agent not just like watching, agent provocateurs.
Literally telling people to climb up
and go.
Yeah.
And that's just funny. 3 that they could identify.
Yeah. There's probably more.
But they have them. They have them doing it.
There you guys go. That's documented. That came out in court, that this is what they're doing. You can watch the video yourself. You can see. And now I want people to understand, it's not just the FBI that's doing this too. It is MPD, undercover MPD. We knew that, by the way, in I think it was April of 2021. We knew that right after January 6th when they arrested Phi Duong. And we learned from his communications that Phi Duong came into contact with undercover MPD. There was undercover FBI there as well that day that he was introduced to by the undercover MPD person. He went inside, he meandered around for 20 minutes, and they infiltrated his Bible study group and tried to get him to go do a surveillance recon of the Capitol prior to Joe Biden's inauguration, because they wanted people to think there was this big threat and hype that up. Remember how they had walled off and fenced up everything for the inauguration, because that event in January had just happened and they were insisting there's this big threat of these big bad guys, out there. And this is what they had to do to try to create that big threat that's out there. They've got to infiltrate the Bible study group of a man named Phi Duong that lived in Arlington, Virginia. It's amazing. And then they start trying to tell him to put the gasoline in the jar. And Phi Duong is so funny, by the way. So first I think they were trying to tell him to modify his gun or something. And he filled out all the paperwork to do it completely legally. And so they're like, oh my God, this guy. So then they're telling him, put the gasoline in the jars. And he goes, well, I think that would technically be an explosive. So I'll have to get a permit from the ATF. And they go, just arrest him for the J6 stuff. They were trying to arrest him for they wanted him to be a DT thing, and they kept trying to get him to do something, over from January until April. They kept trying to get him to do a crime,
and they'll keep pushing and keep pushing. And
this poor man, he's so law abiding that he goes out and does he gets the paperwork to modify his gun or whatever, and he's going to contact the ATF and fill out the paperwork so he can put gasoline in a jar. That's how law abiding this dude was. And they still rolled his ass up, because he walked inside for 15 minutes. It's amazing.
We have had people in and out, but Tomsky is a longtime friend. He's a supporter of the show, and he's working on a new trailer for my live shows to use the entry. But he sent this super chat in English pound sterling, which is really just digital currency like the dollar, right, Tomsky? He says the state across all countries in the Western world are out of control. Individual rights are being eroded and the rights of the people need to be reestablished. We need to keep speaking out against these globalist goblins.
Yeah.
And I wanted to do it in his accent, but I can't do it. So,
well, he's right. He's right.
He's very much right. Christina, just tell everybody where they can find you so that you can head off to bed, because you're an hour ahead of me.
Yes. You can find my YouTube channel is just Radix Verum. And the official social media for the documentary you can find by going to kandkfilm.com. That'll take you to the Give, Send, Go, the fundraiser I have set up for the documentary. All of the official social medias are listed there. If you scroll down to, I think it was update number 2, I put them all in there. So you can find the official YouTube channel, Twitter, Gab, Fediverse for the documentary, so you can follow it on all the official social media. That way you'll get a notification if we do any updates. One thing we have done with the official YouTube channel for the documentary, we put out the trailer, but we've also put out some updates on that channel. So if there's anything going on with the case, or if there's anything going on with the guys, I have a way to let people know on the official documentary page. I have one of the letters from Adam when he was in Supermax up there on the channel. I had a recent one that I did that was highlights for the weaponization committee. That was Barry's statement to the committee and some other information we just thought they should have. Just follow the official documentary social media pages. And you can also just go to my website, which is just radixverum.com. And if you go there right now, it's just a landing page. It has my social media. It also has the trailer up there, and it has my email. So if there's something that you want to, if there's any information you have about the Whitmer case, or for whatever reason you want to reach out to me, you can do so there.
Well, I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate your insight, and I really respect and love the work that you're doing here. And if there's ever anything, definitely going to have you back on, but if there's ever anything that comes up that you want to push out and you want to get out quick, my audience is narrow but diverse, and they tend to talk a lot about the stuff that I have going on, especially with guests like you. I've already got people that have been messaging me going, where do we find her? So not in a weird way. So, but
where do we find this lady?
Yeah, I had one of the guys in the chat earlier was like, what state does she live in? I'm like, unavailable.
Yeah, we're not putting that out there.
I'm
Trust me, guys. I've already been swatted twice.
Oh, no, it's twice?
Yeah. Oh, I didn't say the second time. I'm not even publicly addressing the stuff because I don't give these people attention. And it could have been the FBI that swatted me. I don't actually know.
No kidding, right?
Even the cop said that, like, well, I hope it's not the FBI swatting you. And I was like, that's such a weird thing for a cop to say.
Tomsky said I made it sound creepy.
But yeah, there are repercussions for getting involved in this stuff, though, and people don't want to put their neck on the line. No one wants to take the risk. I know I'm making myself a target for the FBI, and even the lawyers in this case have been scared by what they've seen of if the FBI is willing to do that to these innocent men and send them to jail. Imagine what they'd be willing to do to us. That's the thing. And that's, I think, what makes it terrifying. And for me, that's really why I have stayed with this story and continued to talk about it, because, I think for everybody has that one thing where they're just like, enough is enough. Like, you will go no further. You've already, you're such criminals. You're disgusting. And you should be ashamed of yourself. And I've just decided, as a mom sitting at home in my basement, that I'm going to do something about it. And you guys can all do this too. There's nothing special about me. I don't have any special training. I'm not an expert in anything. I'm literally a person in my house that was like, what can I do? And that it's that simple. Anyone can get involved. Anyone can go, look into something. And try to get the truth out to people. And that's just what we need to do. So yeah,
absolutely.
It never ends though. It's always fun.
You tell Mr. Caserta that I would love to have him on, and that the boss is giving marching orders, and then we'll talk offline from here and about the next topic and the direction to go, and when we can have you back on. And like I said, if there's anything at all that you need to push out, message me and let me know, and I'll do that for you. So I appreciate your time. You have a great night. Go get some sleep. I'm way past my bedtime at this point too. So.
I know.
But it's Friday, so party.
Yeah.
So Thank you very much, Christina. Have a good night.
Have a good one. Good night, guys.
All right, folks. I'm not even going to do much of my shtick. You guys know I have the fundraiser going on for Bob and Sue until the end of April. 15% of all of my earnings from YouTube Subscribe Star on any merchandise sales are going to Bob and Sue to help them with their travel expenses for Garrett as they travel back and forth from where they live in the far reaches of Minnesota down to the Twin Cities to see him as he recovers from his PTSD related incident back in December. And then again, everybody who goes to Christina's Give, Send, Go for the documentary, if they give $10 or more to her, they'll get a $5 credit towards my merchandise. So you're going to help her and you're going to get a credit from me, which then will also help Bob and Sue. So you're helping numerous people through numerous situations. So feel free to do that if you'd like to know what my costs, what it would cost you for shipping and for product, for merch. You can email me at mbrrpodcast@yahoo.com, or you can message me on Twitter at Robe Regiment. And until next time, my friends, fight for your freedom. And you know what? And for everybody that watched, Tomsky, especially for your super chat, thank you very much. But everybody who watched and everybody who's going to share this and watch this, there's a super thank you down there if you're watching this on playback. All the supporters over on Subscribe Star, you guys know who you are. Thank you so much for what you're doing. Thank you for helping me keeping this going. It's not easy, and it's greatly appreciated. And peace, Tomsky. Got to have you back on. It is greatly appreciated what all of you do to help me keep going. And so without any further ado, until next time, my friends, fight for your freedom. It is yours. Fight for your liberty. It belongs to you. And Sic Semper Tyrannis.
We are go for liftoff in T-30.
Stand by for further instructions, Minnesota Black Robe Regiment.
Secondary guidance systems engaged.
Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, it will be on my mark.
All systems are a go. All systems are a go.
Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, you are over the target. You are authorized to fire at